for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Call the August 9th Board of Selectmen meeting to order, 6 o'clock. Only one change to the agenda. Number 2 under consent, it's just that actually we're not the appointing authority on that anymore, the town manager is, but she'll send a letter thanking them for service. So we don't need to take any action on that. Other than that, we'll accept the agenda by unanimous consent. You'll see in your packets that we just need to ratify our votes from the July 19th meeting. There was just a slight issue with the posting, so it's a precaution to do a ratification if someone wants to
I
make.
move to ratify our previous votes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Announcements?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This meeting is being video and audio recorded. We're on our summer Board of Selectmen meeting schedule. The next board meeting is Wednesday, August 23rd, and then there is not another board meeting until Wednesday, September 13th, just FYI. We have one other announcement regarding Massasoit Bridge, and I think our Deputy DPW Director is going to just give us a quick update, correct?
Yep, thanks. Good evening, everyone. The Department of Public Works would like to announce that the Massasoit Bridge on South Cambridge Street will be closed for repairs starting Monday, August 14th at 8 a.m. And the closure will continue through Wednesday, August 16th. The bridge will be closed to vehicles, pedestrians, bikes, and trucks. The bridge will be closed both day and night for repairs. The detour route is Barrett Farm Road and Red Barn Road. We are posting detour signs to help with the directions through the area. And the repairs will return the bridge to its maximum posted limit that existed before, and that's a limit of 20 tons for a 4-axle dump truck. So be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was it for announcements.
Okay. Is there public comment for anything that's not otherwise on our agenda? Hearing none, I don't believe that there's any new business. We'll move on to approval of minutes, warrants, and pending contracts. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes?
Move approval. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of payroll warrants and treasury warrants.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Approval of pending contracts. I think that Libby was just going to point out a couple.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to point out 3. The first is the first one, the purchase agreement for the sewer department with J.F. McDermott, $300,000. This is for the purchase of specialized equipment in connection with the sewer extension project, and it is specifically for the low-pressure sewer lines that will require specific types of maintenance, jetting through the pipes and things, and this was planned from day one that we would need this equipment, and it is covered within the appropriation. The second item, amendment to professional services contract for Public Works with CDM Smith, Inc. This is a contract amendment with an existing contract that we have with CDM Smith for required environmental testing out at the landfill, and we are adding some testing stations in Long Pond that we budgeted for in fiscal 18 through the natural resources budget, so I just wanted to mention that. And lastly, the last item, professional services agreement, town admin, Our Island Home. There's a couple of TBAs in the columns there. This is a search agreement with a professional search firm called Next Exec. At the time of the preparation of the agenda, we were going through the quote process for procurement of these services, and we've selected a group called Next Exec, The contract amount is $30,000 plus limited expenses. And I just wanted to explain that back at the early stages of when the prior Human Services Director, Pam Merriam, left, we did a search twice for an administrator and did not find anyone. We then regrouped a bit and hired an assistant administrator, Erin, and she was trained and went through a certification process for a licensed nursing home administrator, to be a licensed nursing home administrator. And at this point, what we're finding is that Rachel's time as the Human Services Director is too conflicted in order to do both of those jobs. So we have been discussing lately that we should try again to do a search, and maybe if we used a firm that really specializes in nursing home administration searches, we might have better luck. So last week, some staff people and the chair met with the one of the people that specifically does this, and after that we did some quotes, and this was the most responsive vendor, so we would like to engage them to do another search. This doesn't mean Rachel's leaving. It means, though, that our operation is complex and complicated, and we really need to have more than one licensed nursing home administrator available to us. So that's what we're trying to get at.
Okay. Somebody want to make a motion? On the
I'll make a
contracts?
motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. We have a couple of gift acceptances. And we'll send thank you letters.
Yeah, move approval, send thank you letters.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Skip over the resignation, and we will move on to real estate items. These are all under consent. So, does
My
anyone
only-
have any questions?
My only comment is on the recommendation from the Real Estate Committee. They are saying, recommends improving the land swap as presented. I think they meant approving, not improving. If there's a way to improve it, they would have included it, hopefully. So with that change, I would accept it.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Do we want to do 3 through all 3? Okay.
Yes.
Town manager's report.
Okay, so tonight we have a few items connected with the Nantucket Harbor Shimo Plus Parcels Sewer Project, and we've got our engineers and OPM here, and I see our sewer director is jumping up, and we have our contractor here. So we'd like to introduce him and his team and do a couple of other things. So David, you want to do the introduction?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. David Gray, Sewer Director. I want to take and introduce the contractor for the Shimo Nantucket Harbor project. We have Chris Auer sitting here in the front row. He's from Robert B. Auer. We have Bill McMahon, also from Robert B. Auer. And our project manager is going to be Abby Auer. She will be running the project. She'll be over here quite often from time to time, as will Chris. They'll be coming over. We had a couple of meetings with them today to go over basic schedules and everything, which we'll get into a little bit. I'm going to have Abby step up for a minute just to take and introduce herself and give a little bit on the project, and we can go from there. You want to go first, Steve? Okay. Our engineering consultant's going to come up first. Steve will be up from Weston and Sampson first.
Thank you, David. Good evening. As David said, my name is Steve Peterson. I'm with Weston and Sampson Engineers. We're the engineering consultants on the sewer project. Just wanted to introduce the team. David's already done a nice job of that. Obviously, David is the point person in town for this project. This project is for his department. So with Weston and Sampson here tonight, we have Kent Nichols. Kent's the principal with the company supporting this project. I'm the project manager. I'll support I'll be out here periodically and support it from the office. And then we also brought with us tonight, Drew, if you could just show your face. So it's going to be a familiar face. Drew's kind of, we just got a place out here, so Drew's going to be out here with the construction. He'll be a presence out here constantly, day to day for the project. He'll be our resident representative, and there will be other representatives on site also, depending upon how many construction crews and forces are working. We also have our owner's project manager, Frank Ayotte, so Hazen and Sawyer is the OPM for this project. And I think David has already introduced the contractor. The one person that I'll point out, Bill Foster, is going to be the superintendent, so Bill's going to be the guy day-to-day on site out here for the contractor. Basically, we've issued notice to proceed for the project effective today. That was signed today. Contractor has 540 days to complete the project, which means they have officially until January 31st, 2019 to complete the project, all of the work. As per the contract documents, they're limited, their work in the street is limited between mid-September to mid-May this year. Any work that isn't complete at that point will be put on hiatus, and they won't be able to be back out into the streets again until September 2019 to complete whatever isn't done at that point. So that's basically an overview of the time for completion and whatnot. We had a pre-construction conference today. I think David alluded to that briefly. Met with a lot of the town departments, the permitting agencies, some of the utility companies, just to lay the groundwork. Also gave the contractor an opportunity to lay out their schedule. And I think at this point, Abby was going to come up and talk a little bit about the specifics of the schedule, where they're going to start. Areas.
Okay. Hi, I'm Abby Auer, Robert Auer Company. I'm, as they mentioned, the project manager on the job. We plan to start around September 18th with 2 crews. We're going to be starting at the intersection of Vesper and Surfside. We're progressing up Vesper towards Hummock Pond. The second crew is going to be starting at McLean and working through McLean and Tashma, then progressing to the Meadowview and Shimo areas. We'll start a third crew, which will be the service crew from the main to the property lines around the middle to end of October. So our plan is to work on all paved roads now until the asphalt plants close, and then we'll shift onto the gravel and dirt roads.
Thank you.
So just a kind of a brief overview to give you a feel for where they're headed. And I think everybody's pretty familiar by now with the project areas we're talking about. That's the map that was up there. So as Abby said, they're going to, crew number 1 is going to start and stay in this Meadowview area until it's complete. They're going to start on Vesper. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We know that's a really busy area, especially where they're going to be starting right in the intersection of Surfside and Vesper, and then moving quickly out of that intersection, hopefully, and then onto Vesper. And then that second crew is going to start Tashma, McLean. They're going to do these, what we refer to as the other plus areas, Green Meadow and Bayberry. And then they will work their way out into the Shimo area once those areas are complete. So that's a basic overview of the 2 crews and where they're heading. Like you said, a third crew will come in to start taking from the main line and running the service connections out to the property lines. So I think that's a basic overview of the schedule. I don't know if there's any questions about that, I guess, or any questions of the contractor.
Yeah, I had just a question, really more not about the project in particular, just the impact, I guess, on employment and housing, about how many people will be employed on those 3 teams or employed for the whole project will be on island. And you have an idea, not perfectly, the mix of people who will be maybe live here already or, and going to be hired by the firms, will be commuting every day from the mainland or will be residing here during the project. And what, if anything, did you encounter as you tried to find housing for folks?
So our average crews are between 5 and 7 people for the mainline crews. We're actively seeking housing right now for them. So that's about 14 individuals. We have the smaller service crew is around 3 to 4 people. I think the service crew, if we can't secure enough housing, they're probably going to commute from Harwich on the boat. We're hopeful to find housing. So we also try and source some local trucks when possible. So, to use some of the island forces.
Good, thank you.
Just with regard to the engineers, we have one apartment. Drew has a place. He's going to be staying on island during the construction.
Okay.
One of the other pieces of this that's on the agenda is for possible having to work for a couple nights, especially in the Vesper Lane area and that intersection, so that we can get out of the intersection and beyond the hospital or right to the hospital area, which may entail a couple of overnights. I have made some visits to a lot of the residents already. I've talked with the chief down at the Coast Guard station to let him know that this work might possibly be coming. So we will be seeking to get a waiver to be able to work. And the work hours, we've met today quite a bit, and we'd be seeking a complete overnight waiver for the time.
Are you looking for a vote on that now? Because I'm going to
Yes.
recuse myself since
Okay. So-
I'm in a butter.
So we would be looking for a waiver for an overnight, which would be starting somewhere around 7 o'clock in the evening and working straight through until it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, so we can get out of the way for all the school buses and everything. It should, depending on what we end up running into in the intersection, and we met with Verizon and everything today, we should be able to get beyond the area, so we're out of the hospital's way and we're out of the intersection. It's 3 days, maybe max, but we're hoping it'll go a lot quicker than that, so.
So Dave, is that 2 nights or 3 nights? What else?
Possibly 3. We'd ask for 3 just to be safe, but we're hoping that things will progress.
Erica?
I would ask for 4, just to be on the safe side, because you don't know what's going to be caught. And I mean, they wouldn't use it if they wouldn't need it, but
Yes, come on up.
Yeah, come up to the mic, please. And identify yourselves again for the camera.
Chris Sauer, thank you.
thanks.
The night work, it's nothing that we really enjoy doing, the crews or not, but in that intersection to get out of that, we are gonna have one long night to get down to grade, and we have to core a hole in the manhole and get several sections of pipe out around all the utilities and backfilled and completed for traffic in the morning. So that's gonna be the first night is gonna be one of the hardest. And then we're in between a couple different mains there, so it's gonna take a little bit of time to get us up past where it crosses and goes over past the laundromat and where it goes over near the Coast Guard facilities housing. So I don't wanna just lock myself into 3 days and because it might take us 2 days to get out of that intersection. If we have utility conflicts, it hasn't been marked out yet. And even when it's marked out, when we go to dig, you know, it's a little bit of a guessing game where everything is until we get down. Once we get it down on the ground and we stop moving, we start knowing where things are. So, you know, 3 days won't get us, I don't think, far enough away from past the laundromat. It's probably gonna be 4 or so. So I didn't want to just lock ourselves in on that, okay? Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does this help you guys more, or is it more beneficial for the public and traffic and the school buses?
It's more beneficial because school's going to be opening right around the same time. We want to try to avoid any complications with the laundromat or the hospital because they're putting up a lot of their steel right now. So we're hoping to be able to have the road open in the daytime for the residents and the businesses, plus the hospital, and then get back in there late in the afternoon and then move along at night. So we did have a meeting with the Coast Guard today, and one of their biggest concerns were their guys have to respond 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They just need to be able to get out of Gwynn Village, and we told them today that we would make every way possible to have at least one lane so they can get in and out. Their crews have to get in and out, the boat crews. So We had a great meeting today.
David, would you explain the other options? Because I think it makes sense, but I've heard, it would take you 2 weeks or 3 weeks during the day, or the other options aren't great.
The other options would be to try to do that work on the intersection during the daytime. The water company, just luckily, when they went through, the school had just gotten out. We're going to be just getting into the school season, so we're going to have a lot of bus traffic and everything else, so we just think it would be a traffic nightmare and logistics, and, talking with the police department and trying to get that many staff during the day. So we're trying to figure that working at night, it's going to be disruptive, we understand. Get out of the intersection during the daytime so traffic can flow, and then at night, be able to have a bypass around the school or something like that, so.
Erica?
I would note too that if we only gave them a partial night work permit, like to say through midnight, it would take weeks
Yeah.
to get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the least intrusive for the neighbors, least intrusive for everyone else.
Yeah, the biggest thing you're going to hear at night is you'll hear some backup alarms and some, the lighted towers, and it's going to be noise.
Right.
Any service interruptions for the?
Should not be any service interruptions. No.
And so you're looking for a motion for 4 days, 4 nights? Or 5 nights?
Maybe ask for 5 and then
Maximum of 5.
Yeah.
So we're looking for a motion, maximum of 5 nights?
5
I'll
nights.
make that motion.
I'll second. Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So our third item tonight on SHMO is we put before you a policy on sewer connections. So for those of you who don't remember me, I'm Kent Nichols with Weston Sampson. I guess I've been in front of you a few times now, so maybe you'll recognize my face. This was in your packet. This is a long time coming. We've actually been working with the staff for quite a while to develop what we feel is a consistent policy that does a couple of things. One is handles fairly our need to get sewer service connections out to the people that are going to be fronted on the SHMO and Plus area sewer project. The second thing it does is it kind of cleans up, for clarity in one place, a lot of the different things that are kind of weeded through different pieces of policy, some of it written, some of it in amendments and things. Long-term, David has been identified as a priority to rework the sewer regs in general, and he's working on those now, but we've recognized through the meetings with the staff that's going to be really a longer-term item, and we really wanted to memorialize the things that we think really set down for people in the SHMO area clarity on how service connection is going to work for folks. So this is an ongoing item. We've been before you in a few other cases to answer general questions on the project. This is one of the last pieces that we've done. It goes hand in hand with some outreach that we've been doing, including public meetings. I think I talked the last time I was here, we just finished and posted some frequently asked questions to help answer questions for folks. And we actually have a flow chart that I'm hoping is going to be posted very soon that gives kind of a layout of, at request of one of the homeowners in the town, kind of lays out the actions needed by a homeowner to go through where they are today to get to connected to the sewer. And we think all those things will be very helpful, but in the end, we do want to try to make sure that everybody's on the same page with the policy. So what we decided that was the most appropriate thing at this time is a policy specific to this project. And it'll allow us to kind of, capture all the things we've decided to date, move forward with the SHMO project, and then our vision is these would eventually be folded in appropriate ways to your long-term overall sewer policies. So hopefully you've had a chance to read it. I will hit the high points real quick. I won't belabor these, and I'll leave it open for a lot of questions for yourselves as you go through. The basic thing we start with is all properties get at least one sewer service if they're developable. The only ones that don't are properties that the town has identified to us as not developable. Traditionally, the big ones of those are, if you've seen on our maps, we have a lot of properties in green, land bank, things like that. They're not going to be developed. They don't get a service. The big challenge is we try to give everybody one service, but there's quite a few properties that have the future ability to either subdivide or the past or future ability to add a second dwelling on the property based on your regulations. And so in the case when you're going to have 2 dwellings on the site on a property in the future, or if you have 2 dwellings on the site now, we have the ability under this policy to leave a second service connection for those. So they'll leave, when we go down and put the sewers in the street, that, you know, we just talked about with Robert B. Auer as the contractor, we're going to essentially leave one service for smaller lots with one dwelling. We're going to talk to the homeowners. We'll be sending an individual questionnaire to them. If they identify the need or the desire for a second service connection, we're going to give them that. If they identify the need for a third or more, we're going to have a discussion about whether that's appropriate, and we're going to handle those on a case-by-case basis. For the most part, you have 2 dwelling units limit as a limit in Nantucket on your parcels, and so we can actually make that happen. That's kind of what these first few policy numbers 1 through 4 lay out in general. You get into a little bit later, we do definitely, if there are 2 dwellings on a site existing, we're definitely going to leave them 2 services. And your current sewer policies actually require this, so this isn't a change. But they're going to have, for 2 individual dwellings, they're going to have 2 service connections. In addition, if you have a mixed-use property, that would be the same thing. 2 different uses kind of constitute 2 different dwellings or 2 buildings on there, and those get 2 service connections. Kind of cleaning up your current regulations. 7, what we tried to do is capture the fee system that's in place for this, and you'll remember this. We've talked about this in some of the meetings going back. There's actually 2 fees that are applicable to the folks that are going to connect in the SHMO and plus areas. The first one is your sewer connection fee, which is at this point in time is a set fee of $2,000, which gets reduced to $500 if they connect in a timely manner, which in this case everyone will. And the second one is your capacity, not your capacity, your privilege fee, which is a $6,322.15. Frank always remembers that number. Number that was established back in the mid-2000s when you did upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant. Again, both of those fees get paid per connection. The one thing that has been in the questions there, and we wanted to get into this actual line, is you also have on the books a capacity utilization fee, a CUF fee. The intent, our understanding of this was the intent was never to charge that to this SHMO area because it was a needs area that was identified early on, and the plus areas were added as well and intended to be fill-in areas that should have been originally captured in that planning. So this just lines up the fact that there is no intent to charge the capacity utilization fee to existing dwellings in this project. We're setting a actual date certain on the establishment of what constitutes an existing dwelling, because there's constant building that goes on in these areas. So our recommendation is, rather than come up with an arbitrary date somewhere, we decided that we're going to pick a date certain so it's clean for the purposes of paperwork. And so we've recommended the 31st of December of this year as the date by which, if you have a dwelling approved, all approvals for construction, and you're ready to go, you can be considered, if you want, you can be considered an existing dwelling for the purposes of this project. And that mostly plays back to fees and some of the financial advantages here. Dwellings that get built in the future, after that, approved and built in the future, would fall in as future dwellings, and they wouldn't get some of these advantages on fees that you've got established in your program. We have a limitation on time to apply. This is mostly based right now on your existing sewer regs and your existing Board of Health regs. So the majority of the area is considered a nitrogen-sensitive area. It's an area of special concern for groundwater quality. And so in those areas, the Board of Health regs actually require connection in a 6-month period to connect. Your general policy requires everybody to connect within a 2-year period of when sewer is made available to them, with a minor exception, and that minor exception is, in a few instances, folks have recently put in innovative alternative systems, and they have an extension up to 10 years from when that system was approved. We talked about that again at one of the prior Board of Selectmen meetings, and it's a very limited number of properties. I think Roberto at the time identified that number for me as like 18 properties project-wide, so not a lot. In general, we expect that folks are going to have to connect within 2 years. The way we've written this policy in agreement with the Board of Health folks is that we're going to require everybody to get their connection form in within 6 months, get it approved, or get an extension within that period of time. So everyone has stated their intent to get in here. We've recognized through some of our outreach discussions that there's a perception that there might be too much of a glut of service connection work going on. And so we've really looked to give that freedom to use that whole 2 years to make the connections. And we're going to continue to work with folks to make sure that can happen. So that's set up in provision in here in item number 8. Number 9 is just really a section that talks a little bit about the fact that we are putting some new sewer in front of some existing dwellings that already have sewer, and we're just making it clear to them that, assuming that they haven't paid fees before, they would be eligible to, get those same fee systems put in place. We're not requiring a change in the connection unless there's a compelling public reason to do that, but there may be a couple of instances, for instance, a home that connected with a grinder pump before that can now connect by gravity. We're going to allow them the option to do those things and potentially get an advantage. And then 10 is kind of, this is the low pressure piece, which the challenge with some of your regulations is your regulations weren't written a lot around low pressure sewers. And so this idea of individual grinder pumps and low pressure sewers aren't really well represented in there. So we worked on refining a lot of those pieces. And so there's a few key pieces in this item 10 that I just wanted to highlight. The first one is every service connection, every individual service connection is going to have its own individual grinder pump. That means if a parcel gets 2 service connections because there's 2 dwellings, they'll get 2 grinder pumps. The second piece of this is that this board voted back in the spring, as I recall, to come up with a reduced price program to defray the cost of the grinder pumps, because we recognize that the folks on low pressure have some extra costs coming to them for their service connections. And the policy that you decided to adopt was to provide a grinder pump to everybody at a reduced price of $1,500. We will be proceeding with a project to procure the grinder pumps. You'll actually be hearing from us at a future meeting about an amendment to do that procurement. And we're going to do that separately and go out and get those pumps. We're working with David still on the process now. We'll be putting that process forward. We'll buy the pumps. We expect that reduced price program will save everybody that gets a grinder pump a few $1,000s. You voted that you would sell those pumps back to the homeowners at a reduced price of $1,500, with the exception that in the event that one of those homeowners had an innovative alternative system that was approved and installed, you would further reduce that price to $500. And so that is reflected in this. One of the key things is that we've actually recognized that the limitation on that reduced price grinder pump purchase is going to be limited to 2 dwellings per parcel. If you are looking to subdivide a parcel in a big way, you're not going to be in the town's business of providing reduced grinder pumps for a lot of different homes. We're going to kind of set a cap on that at 2 per parcel. And then there's some timing things that are in the policy. The last one is we also set a cap on how long we can provide those reduced cost grinder pumps. We really want to get that solicitation out, get as many folks in with their grinder pumps as we can, get the project to work effectively, and then close that process up so we can keep the paperwork tight and not have an ongoing project that lingers for a few years because there's 1 or 2 pumps left to buy. So we've again talked about trying to get this all done within 2 years. And we've also put a sunset on this that says that same December 31st, 2017 date applies for properties that would be considered existing. And so that anybody who builds on a parcel after that date, after this December, would not be eligible for that reduced price on the grinder pumps. And then the last 2 items mostly deal with people who have specialty conditions. In particular, the thing that I wanted to emphasize on this is the very last provision is we've been really clear with folks on this. While the town is helping to get the grinder pumps in people's hands at a reduced cost, the town cannot be responsible for the operation and maintenance of the pumps. So this is where we've drawn the line and said we're going to actually have folks, when they receive their grinder pump, sign off that says they understand this clause, and individual homeowners will be responsible perpetuity for the maintenance, replacement, repair, and other support actions required to run their system. So I apologize for the fact that it's as long as it is, but believe it or not, this is the really reduced version, and I feel it's actually fairly concise for the things we're trying to encapsulate here. We do feel like, based on the incarnations that we've been through, it's appropriate to adopt this policy at this point in time. So, and I don't know if Libby has any other thoughts or...
I think you've got it well covered. My only question is, I don't remember if we discussed this, but will there be some kind of, maybe it's when you buy the grinder pump, some kind of instruction on maintenance or time, and I know I wish I had instruction on my septic system when I bought the house 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's come up in our Q&A a lot too, and some of the things. We actually have a few things. One is we have some general information on Q&A that's in the FAQs that we've posted. We also have some additional information on grinder pumps that we're actually mailing to everybody that's going to get one ahead of time, which is like a 2-page double-sided, four pages of kind of general questions that people will need to know about. And then when they actually go to get the grinder pump, we're going to actually provide them with O&M instructions. In addition, as part of the support services we're providing for the town, we're actually going to be working with whoever we select as a vendor to make sure that they provide training for on-island support staff that can now maintain the pumps that are going to be there, specific to those pumps. And we're also going to post that O&M information so that if a homeowner loses their manual that they got, they can find it again on the
Got it
town
all
website.
covered. That's good.
Just a question on third dwelling units, tertiaries. So obviously they would be paying third fees on those and wouldn't be eligible for the reduced cost grinder pump. Would they be required to pay the capacity utilization fee for
So
a third dwelling unit?
my understanding is for any existing dwellings, there is no application of the CUF. That was the way we discussed it.
Up through December.
The question of tertiaries is kind of that one piece that's left a little open in this, and we talked about this a little bit, and actually, I see that Andrew is in the audience, and we went back and forth, and we're actually still going back and forth a little bit with some discussion that we still want to clear up with Andrew on exactly how to handle tertiaries so we're really consistent with it. But this policy does not require you nor restrict you in the way you administer tertiaries. What it does say is that it's not our intent to require a tertiary to have a separate service connection.
Okay.
You may still do that because your current sewer policies allow you to make that decision. If the sewer department feels it's in the best interest of the sewer department to do that, you may still do that. This policy change doesn't restrict your current policies in that way. The question of the CUF is a very difficult one, and I think that what we had talked about is the need to probably revisit that coming up to be really clear in Nantucket about who pays the CUF and when, because it just needs some cleanup. And I think we're continuing in our discussions with staff, and the town manager's been a big part of that, to talk about the best way to reapproach the clarification of the CUF. In theory, anybody who adds a dwelling unit in the future, in the areas after what we've liked to establish is that December 31st deadline, date certain. Once that we pass that, that's a future dwelling. And in theory, you would have the ability, if you feel it's appropriate, to assess CUFs on those parcels.
Okay.
Whether you do or not, I think really needs to be part of a discussion of the CUF in general in the future.
Okay.
What's interesting with that is I think the original intent was the areas outside of the needs areas.
Right.
And it's because we didn't want to have an incentive to put everybody onto sewer. If we're sort of if we're changing that to be like any new dwellings in any area, that's sort of a.
But again, that's not what I'm saying is you still have the freedom to administer that the way you want to. This policy doesn't address that.
No, understood, but the way you described it, it sounded a little bit like after that date, even people in the needs.
I'm just saying you have the option to do that. What this policy says is anyone who has a dwelling that's existing now or is considered existing because of approved things by this December, you will now have a policy that says they will not be paying the CUF. Everyone else falls into your general CUF question that still, as I said, I think, and I agree with you, there's some need to clarify what the policy is and how you administer it. That's one of the things we've been talking about. Our suggestion is that we'd like to do that clarification outside of the specific SHMO regulations.
No, and I agree with that. The other question, I think, since there's no betterments, we shouldn't be scared of the capacity utilization, because people are still getting immense benefit from this.
Although the CUF is a significant number. It's
It is.
13,000 and change.
It is.
You probably know the numbers.
And the other thing that I think should be talked about, not within this document, but I think that the privilege fee should be tied to cost of living. Otherwise, we're going to get 10 years out, and it's going to look like a tiny amount, and we're going to be running, we're not going to have enough money to do the projects we still need to do. So I think we shouldn't be scared of putting a cost of living on that as well, as just a policy question. And the reason I say that is we used to have a $2,000 connection fee that did everything, and if we had just put a cost of living on that, it would far outstrip, back from the 80s, it'd far outstrip the cost that we're charging then. The cost of the plant was like $2 million, we were charging everyone $2,000. We were gaining up tons of money. And so we have to be smart about having put that on now, so we continue to have money flowing back to us.
And I will say, for information purposes only, that's a bit of a different issue. We're just acting based on what your current privilege fee is. There was no provision for escalation in it.
Right.
I will say, when I work on privilege fees for other communities, we usually link them to some type of escalation.
Would it
But
be
that
appropriate to have
fee
that-
on the books doesn't have one.
Would that be something we would put in here, or is that something we put in here, or does that go?
I think at this point, if you vote to change the privilege fee, my goal in this was to not actually identify the amount of the privilege fee if you see it.
Right.
Because again, the goal of this is to clean up things so people know where they are today, not to reach out and change a lot of your other policies. This is intended to be, if anything, a good way for us to be really confident in the answers we give people, because people on the project have a lot of questions, and they deserve to be able to have answers as we go to build sewers. So we're trying to be really clean with that without restricting your ability to continue to govern and make decisions on how those fees work, so that if you wanted to change that in the future, I think you'd have the right to do that. Yeah, it just gets tricky when you've held the fee for, 13 years, and you decide to all of a sudden escalate it. So there's also a thing that you should recall, and we've talked about with staff a little bit on the privilege fee side, which is you cannot over-collect privilege fee. You had an original amount that you sought to collect with that privilege fee.
Right.
You can only collect that amount, and then you have to sunset the fee. So there's a need to kind of do some accounting, and so there's not always a need to escalate it if you're eventually going to collect the whole amount. Sometimes you can let it just kind of stay flat. So there's some different schools of thought that are available. And certainly, none of this is intended to restrict your
Or the
future
capacity
actions.
utilization doesn't go away and we escalate that, because that can go to building the future plan or upgrading future plan.
I do think you have options.
Yeah, so I think we have to be looking at those.
So I think we should approve this policy, but I'd like to have those other subjects come back sooner than later as an agenda item, because it's, we have top of mind awareness now, so if we could do that in the next few weeks or so, that'd be great. But I'll make a motion to approve the policy as presented.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. This is back to Ash Street. Recommendation from the Traffic Safety Work Group to eliminate a parking space. I think that we have the applicant here. And- Okay, thank you.
We had wanted a clarification from Mike Burns, and I think he had forwarded the information to Erica. This is Beth Frady's. She and her husband are the owners of 5 Ash Street. And the clarification was that there is an existing parking area across from 5 Ash Street, and the way that the DPW has recommended that the stripe line be drawn so that from the existing front of it, we would preserve a 20-foot parking space, and then the remainder behind it be a 20-foot strip that would be no parking. It's not exactly what we requested, but Mrs. Frady's was out there today, and she's able to make that turn. She still has to maneuver a little bit, and we really appreciate that the way the Traffic Safety Committee has recommended it and come up with it. I also forwarded you a few more pictures that show just the situation on the ground, and we would certainly appreciate your approving this, as my client's sister-in-law and her husband have hit the fence, and we're trying to avoid that. It's a safety issue.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. It's very, very hard to get in and out, but with what you've allotted, I will be able to get in and out.
Okay.
I just had one question. Were these the existing conditions when you purchased the home?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, we purchased from a builder who, that's the cobblestone inn, as you probably are
Right.
aware, and the builder.
Oh, into the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we purchased the home from a builder who did the,
No, I understand, but you purchased it with this, the existing condition in terms of the driveway and the difficulty driving in
yeah,
and
we
out?
didn't
Okay.
realize it
No,
till we got there, yeah. You're right.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
And is the fence the neighbors? Is that your boundary line there?
That's
And the
the
white?
boundary line.
That's the white.
Well, this is a tough one. I went out and looked at it yesterday, and I did a little, yeah, that's tight. You can get in and out, but you have to be perfect. It's a lot of turning. I look at the driveways up ahead, and they don't have any parking spaces, so that's been somehow approved. I don't know when. And on the other side is, I don't want to take public parking away. And now, I voted for this 3 weeks ago to approve traffic safety because they've looked at it, and I believe traffic safety's thinking of this, it was a zero-sum game. I didn't agree with that at first, but they had to have a space. They could ask for a waiver, but it didn't happen. So one car goes in, one space. If they don't have a driveway, then that's one more car on the road. So they trying to get traffic safety, and Mr. Burns, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they see it as a zero sum. I kind of look at it as taking public parking away. Those are just my thoughts. Kind of, I can see all sides of it.
Yeah, I mean,
My concern is that we're piecemealing and backing ourselves into a corner with public parking. Every lot that every time we take away public space, we're getting one space closer to being forced into a decision without any particular plan. I do think that the arrangement is unique to that street because everyone else, you've got your brick wall on your right, so trying to get around that corner. Other properties have been able to make an angle. I think there are mistakes made prior to you buying it, and I think now we're paying for it with a public space. And I don't like the piecemealing approach to looking at every single spot and starting to take away public parking one by one. So that's my concern. But I do think it is the most difficult spot to get out on that street because of the boundary line and the corner.
If I could just chime in, I don't exactly agree that it's a 0-0 situation. I mean, the driveway is long enough so that two cars could be parked in there. Mrs. Frady's and her family, she's got family members over on North Water Street, and it's easy enough for them to pull in, and it will take two cars off the street, and we are only eliminating, only one space will be eliminated as a result of it. As I said, the condition was there. I've been an attorney on this island for 30 years. I have never thought to advise a client to see if you could back out of your driveway. The DPW approved the curb cut. They didn't pick up on it. My client, who lives there, saw the property, didn't realize it until they actually had to do the maneuvering. And they simply can't get out of the driveway, and it is a safety hazard, and someone's going to get hurt. Thank you.
But I do understand what you're saying. I grew up on North Water, that one right there.
just go to the mic, sorry.
I know what you're saying. I mean, I grew up on that North Water, 10 North Water. It's right in between Ash Street and Ash Lane, and it is a tough place for parking. I know 7 North Water just got approval right in front of our house on 10 North Water for a parking space there, and everyone on Ash does have a parking space with their driveway. So I get that you don't want to take it away, and I totally understand. We do have family, they're actually in Tom Nevers, and we do fit 2 cars in my driveway when we have it clear. We can. So I think you're being one. I mean, you'll be, because I could use 2 in my driveway if I can get in there.
I'm gonna support this, and I'm gonna hold my nose and support it. I think, I grew up at 50 Cliff, and I remember when these yards weren't parking lots. I remember when we actually had gardens, and you could walk around downtown and see gardens instead of brick parking yards. And I think the lack of the town's willingness to put a value on parking is coming at a huge cost. And some of the loopholes that we've left available is a huge cost. People are parking now overnight just outside the parking district, and they're parking for weeks on end outside the parking district, so that their clients who are renting their houses can have their parking areas. And there's I could give 100 other stories. I think that we need a transportation and parking commission. I think the selectmen can't handle this, what we're dealing with, and I think we need to start charging for these things. And, and it will be something that will improve the experience and improve the downtown, and maybe we could, I can dream and think maybe we'll get our yards back at some point. maybe the neighbors will actually get to park near their house and not have to ruin their yards. So I just, I'm going to vote for this, but I hope that the board has the intestinal fortitude to tackle this issue and make some difficult decisions in the next half a year or a year.
So why not start now?
What's that?
Why not start now with this?
Well, because I just think, why not start now? I don't think it's, the horse is out of the gate on this one. I look at this property and the curb cut's there, the sidewalk's already been flattened. I'm not sure that this is the battle I'd like to make, but I do think that we need to, I think we need to really, put something in place to change this. We've been talking about this stuff for 20 years, and we haven't, and we keep making the same mistakes over and over again.
One thing I'd just like to note is just as DPW and traffic safety is approving these new driveways in the core, let's just try to make sure that we identify at the very beginning if we're going to have to eliminate a parking space. I would imagine that we could just do that a little bit better, but I am going to vote for this.
And Don, I would just completely agree with that. I think the horse will be out of the gate. Anytime parking gets to us, the horse is already out of the gate. So I don't think that, like you were saying, Jim, why not take a stand now? I think that it's just going to keep happening until we do have some sort of policy. But I also agree that this happened a couple steps back.
Yeah, and I just think we should know it going in, that we will be eliminating an on-street parking space.
But doesn't every curb cut eliminate a parking space?
No, it's on the opposite side of the street.
No, I understand in this case. I'm just saying in general. When
No.
No?
No.
It's about the turning radius and whether there's parking on that side or not. So this was a turning radius situation.
No, in general, when I've gotten curb cuts for homes I've had, there's been a loss of a parking space. So
Only if it's
But not
not always.
okay, maybe that's true. Yeah.
So does someone want to make did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, the only time traffic safety even reviews these is when somebody is coming forward with needing to remove a parking space, because it gets reviewed by them before it comes to you. Otherwise, DPW just approves them.
So maybe it does need to be identified at the DPW
And
level?
also, they have to get approval from HDC, so that's actually their first, they've already gone through that process first. So
Do they look
maybe
at,
it can start even before you.
I think you can go to DPW before HDC, but I'm not sure.
You're supposed to bring in an HDC
Okay.
approved plan.
Okay.
does it look at
That's
both
correct,
sides,
yeah.
the survey? Is the survey just one side? Is there some kind of loop? Okay.
Now,
In the beginning, like zoning and that kind of stuff, is it?
you just have a plot plan into the HDC.
I don't believe a survey plan is required
No.
for the
I did it myself.
application.
So.
Maybe it should be. This could have been picked up possibly earlier when the driveway was approved 2 years ago.
Or maybe we
It
need
wasn't.
to change our order of things, and if it looks like because a survey is going to be costly to a property owner. If it looks like a parking space is going to be removed, maybe we come here first, and if you say yes, they proceed through the rest of the process, and if you say no, we're done.
Or should traffic safety weigh in on it early too?
Yeah.
Maybe traffic safety should
Before-
look at
before
it
we
anywhere in
get
the
it.
core. I don't know.
I think they should see it early.
Maybe we can think about it.
Well,
But
and
I
again,
think there's got to be a better
They do
process.
look at them all, only when a parking space is being removed, though.
Right. And I'm suggesting they do it every
Maybe they
time
need
there's a
to look
curb
at
cut.
all of
DPW
them.
has already said that from here on out, they plan on tightening their requirements when they receive a submission, so that it can be shown at that point whether or not parking does need to be removed. So
Okay.
they are tightening their end of it.
So that would fix the issue. Does somebody want to make a motion on this particular, so that they can sit down?
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye. Any opposed?
I'll abstain.
Okay. 4-0.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a perfect example of the psychology of previous investment. You put all this effort in, and then it gets to us, and then people are expecting it already.
It's like the banners on Main Street,
It's the banners on-
just like the banners on Main Street.
Yeah.
It's the
All right, which
yard sale program,
Yeah.
when the neighbors have spent all their money.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna say no. I mean, these are the kind of things that policies should be before, not, not after. It's not.
And that's why I suggested we have the policy, develop the policy for the signs on, banners on Main Street.
Okay, let's move on to the update on our Island Home capital projects. I think Rachel and Dave are here.
Hi, good evening. Trying to give you a brief update on where we are with the capital projects from the last update I provided in June. This week has actually been a pretty productive, busy week. Yesterday, myself and one of the architects from SMRT that's helping us provide all of the drawings and preliminary plans met with the Department of Public Health to review a lot of these projects. So we were able to secure SMRT to do all of the conceptual schematic designs, and through the discussions we've had with Vertex, who's doing a lot of our project oversight management, we've learned that it's likely that a lot of the companies or construction firms that will probably bid on these would probably do all of the projects. So instead of sending out a whole bunch of different bids, we're going to all roll it into one particular bid. It just made the most sense. And based on the meeting that we had with the Department of Public Health, it was very productive. It was, they got a lot of feedback provided to us, and some of the things that, some updated regulations that we weren't aware of, that we were able to make some minor tweaks to the plans that we had. And so the architect was able to finalize those today, and we'll get the plans to review by tomorrow. And we also hope to have the estimated construction costs by tomorrow. So with that, what we hope to do is take the bulk of all of these projects, except for a few minor ones, and get the bid out within about 2 weeks. The application to the Department of Public Health will be done simultaneously, so that should also be done in about 2 weeks. So now that they already have a preliminary idea of what our project is, we should not see a very large turnaround time for the approval from the Department of Public Health. There are only a few other areas that were not tied into this bid that we're about to put out. The kitchen laundry upgrades with the actual equipment. Our laundry equipment was installed today. So we have already been able to utilize that. It is working wonderfully, and it has already made a huge improvement with the air quality in that room. Our kitchen equipment should be coming shortly. We had a little bit of delay in the lead time for some of the equipment for just the vendors' reasons. Bathroom upgrades, one thing the Department of Public Health suggested. We had talked internally. It was a suggestion that Dave even had about an alternate to our bid to provide additional emergency lighting fixtures in our bathrooms. Because one thing we learned when we had Juno was that our bathroom lighting is not tied to our generator. It is not required by regulation, but it does provide a significant challenge for staff. There are new regulations now that once you provide any type of renovations to such bathrooms, you have to provide the lighting and a more permanent fixture. You can't just do a plug-in nightlight that might run on the generator. So we will be actually doing that. That was something we were kind of tossing back and forth. So whether that gets done within this phase or in another phase at a later date, at some point we will be doing that because it will be part of our application to the Department of Public Health for approval. The resident room furniture and closet upgrades is not part of the full bid that we're putting out. We are separating those into 2 separate projects. So I have started to secure some votes. We reached out to 8 different vendors, and hopefully we will receive responses by August 28th. Only 3 of them have responded so far, but I haven't gotten any actual formal proposals yet. The other furniture is just simple design of the dressers, side tables, and we hope that what we'll do is once the closets are determined, we'll be able to kind of coordinate it so it is aesthetically pleasing to our residents. Boiler and heating system, that project is ultimately completed. We just have the roof repairs will be done by August 30th, and then we should be fully set with that. Right now, we're just setting up the IT portion of it so that we get emails when any of the temperatures in the building are off range. Instead of just a normal alarm going off, we actually get the notification and can respond much quicker. And Other than that, we have our exterior sewer. David has been working with us very closely. He's been coming by even more than we originally thought to keep that flow maintaining. And the other project that we have is electronic medical records, and that continues to go. You all just approved both of the contracts, so we hope to get that project and start implementation phase about October of this year. The only other thing that I had brought to your attention in June was an operational assessment. We originally were going to do a full RFQ for the entire operational assessment of the facility. Through some discussions with town administration, we determined that maybe we'd phase that out a little bit. So that has been sent out, and the responses are due back on August 14th. So once that project hopefully gets underway, which is more staffing levels type of focus, we will then start working on the full RFQ for the remaining portion of the operational assessment. As you know, our capital planning is about to come away for the next fiscal year, for fiscal 19. So there are some discussions that I have been having with Dave in regards to potential additional capital projects and things that we need to address. So I am actually going to turn this over to Dave so that he can kind of give you an update from his perspective on where the next steps for us are to go if nobody has any questions on our current projects. Great.
Good evening, Dave Fredericks. I really wanted to just suggest to the board that, as everyone knows, we went before town meeting. We're unsuccessful with the idea of the relocation. But one of the things that the board spent a lot of time thinking about was the operating model and how the operating model ultimately affects the economics of staying in this business. And one of the things that I think that we would like the board to consider, working through Libby and through the financial side of the town, is to revisit what the next 5 years might look like, because the practical is we can't change the operating model in the building we're in. And so one of the things we think we have to wrestle to the ground is, if we really don't have a new location for the building and we're going to stay there, we have to start addressing then what are those things that we would need to do to the building if we want to pursue another operating model. But I think it starts with, if we kept the operating model the way it is, what do the next 5 years look like, so we have a base. And I think that's one of the things we're looking for some help with. So from that, we can then look at what are the things we would do to the building if we thought we were going to stay in that facility and try to move the operating model to something more efficient. And so we're looking for some help with that model getting built. So I think Brian has the bulk of the information he needs. There may be some review of what might happen in staffing over the next 3 to 5 years. But that, again, would allow us then to start that next phase of what might we be able to do in that building and start to have a comparative kind of process going forward. So it's just food for thought, if you would.
I'm glad you brought, that was kind of the question I was going to ask. If we're staying there, what do we have to do to change that other operating model?
Right.
You know, small house model, do we have to, you know, is there additions that need to be made? Do we have to let by attrition, let some of the residents go? What do we have to do? Those are the questions that go through my head so that we're able to operate this efficiently.
Right, and you know, the improvements we're making are really just bringing us back to, you know, a solid facility, but it doesn't extend the life of the building. And so we need to understand the next 5 years, which is what we think we bought from these improvements. But as part of that, you have to then ask yourself, do we still want to migrate towards a small house model, and what does that mean? And so I think one of the capital requests may be for some additional consulting as we start to really take apart what could be done if that building's one of the things that the town wants to fully explore. And frankly, I don't think that's inexpensive or easy. I don't think any of the things we talked about last fall are any different. They're all painful discussions. But it starts with, how do we stay in business for the next 5 years, and do we understand what that means?
Well, if I added this up right, this was $1.5 million. Just give or take.
It is. It's also 2 or 3 years worth of projects all kind of finally come together.
And I'm glad we're doing them.
Right.
But I'm just saying, that was Rick Atherton used to always say, let's get on to the other building, because we're funneling money into a sinking ship. So
right.
that,
So a lot of this waited, but it had to be done
I know, which is great. I mean, we're glad we're doing it.
now without the approval of a new building.
And I just want to bring up one point that Daniel Genta, the Department of Public Health, brought up to us. In the next capital phase, I need to speak to Nora, who, and I'm forgetting her last name, but she helps manage the determination of need process. The cap is 1.9 million. As you just said, we're at 1.5 now, and it's an accumulative total, it's not per project. So one thing I had asked him was, if we do have any significant capital expenditures to our current building within the next, say, year after these projects are done, does that trigger the determination of need process? The preliminary answer I got was yes. So whether we're doing a new building or we're just continue to renovate or changing what we're doing now, we will still have to undergo that process, which is very lengthy. So that's also something to consider.
And for the camera, for the people listening at home, what does that impact of that mean? What does that?
The determination of need, it has a full entire review of our entire building operations based on whether they approve the additional capital expenditures. Ultimately, it's what the hospital, to put it in perspective, had to do to get approval to build a new hospital. So even if we're not building a new building, we still need to go through the exact same process to do any additional renovation to our current building, which will be a pretty scrutinizing process.
Is there a time frame on that when they say 1.9 is the
That's
max?
the only clarification I have asked for, and I haven't got a response back yet. But ultimately, what I was told is when you're in the process of these, if you're doing any additional capital within a year of when these projects were even completed, that will likely trigger that 1.9 million. Because what we'll have to do is go back to them for approval, and they'll say, we just approved these other major projects. Now you need to go through the determination of need process.
Rachel, is this process, it's very cumbersome, what you're
Yes.
saying. Is there a bad outcome that could come out of this?
What's the worst case?
Right, they come in and they do this view and say, okay, 5 years, you have to do.
I can't imagine that they wouldn't approve something, but they would probably put it under a lot of scrutiny and under a lot of review, because once you've triggered that process, they're looking at, say, 20 years of sustainability. So if we're just triggering it because we're doing a few more minor renovations, they're going to say, no, let's figure out how this is really going to be effective for you.
So they might want us to spend more. They might want far more
And you're triggering
upgrades.
a lot more, probably regulations and things that are new than the building. So there was a lot of things that were brought up in our meeting that we weren't even aware of, that were very, very new as of this year, regulations in terms of the building of nursing homes. So you're going to fully trigger everything in the
So-
scope of the building.
It's kind of like when you do a renovation and you hit a certain threshold, you trigger all the new codes.
Correct.
But even more.
Exactly, and I think
A
it's
higher
also
level.
important. I think they would start to really challenge you on your operating model and how it aligns into your building. So to some extent, they're going to force you into the exact discussion we've tried to get through and been unsuccessful. And keeping in mind that the state's view of this is the small house model, the federal government's view of small house model is the way you go. So we would have a facility that can't deliver that, and pressure from a regulator saying you need to deliver that, along with then the building changes.
So Rachel, what is the capital ceiling that would trigger an upgrade to current code by
What is the-
by the determination of need?
1.9 million.
So anything over that, we would have to
Anything
bring the
over that
entire
triggers the
building up to
determination of need
code.
process.
No, determination
no.
of need process.
I would assume that that would require bringing the entire building up to code,
Okay,
yes.
that's what
because
I-
once you've started that process,
So anything over
they're going to
1.9,
do a
we've got to
full review.
redo the whole building, we think. That'd be a question that I'd like to know the answer to from them.
Sure, I can ask that along with the
Okay.
timeline of projects, yep.
Well, it is something that we are planning on revisiting a more significant discussion on in the very near future. Thank you very much.
One other tidbit, when we built the building, it was not up to code the day we built it. We had waivers, because when I was reading all this about half a year ago, we had waivers on room size from day one. So I think, this has been a long time coming, some of this.
Thank you, Rachel, and especially thank you, Dave. Dave's been really instrumental in this. The next item is reviewing the November 6, 2017 special town meeting warrant articles. So in your packet is a cover sheet that is updated from the last time the board had a discussion, which was July 19th. And I tried to capture the things that I thought you had generally agreed to, needed some more discussion about, and there are a couple of new items that have come in. So the items that we discussed and I believe you generally agreed to at your last meeting, specifically the retail marijuana articles, and we've invited Katie Loftman back from Copeland and Page to review this again because it is very confusing and there are still some legislative unclarity about what municipalities can and can't do and when. So last time we discussed a zoning bylaw amendment and or a moratorium to a certain date, December 2018, I think we talked about, so that if and when, hopefully when, there is more legislative clarity, we might amend our zoning bylaw. Just before the meeting, Katie and I were also talking about whether or not, and this came up earlier today, we need a general bylaw that might further regulate the types of establishments that would be allowed. So Copeland and Page, I think, is working on an updated advisory to its clients, which hopefully will be laid out in such a manner that identifies the policy decisions that boards should be considering when putting forward proposals to town meeting or the ballot. But in the meantime, we're going to get Katie to go over that with us here and get at what exactly we're going to be putting on the warrant. Planning is working on a zoning bylaw which will identify the location of where establishments would be permitted and maybe some other zoning requirements. So Katie, do you want to just give us an update?
Good evening, Katie Lockman, Copeland and Page. KP Law, sorry. We're happy to be here this evening and further our discussion of where things stand on the state level with respect to marijuana regulation. So since we last met, the governor has signed into law what is known as now the Act to ensure safe access to medical and adult use marijuana in the Commonwealth. This is comprehensive rewrite of both the ballot question 4 that was passed in November of last year and the ballot question from 2012, which regulated medical use marijuana. So there's lots of changes in the regulatory structure and the way that municipalities are going to be able to zone for and perhaps prohibit or limit. So Libby has asked that I address specifically the actions that the town might look to taking on its special town meeting warrant coming up this fall. I'd like to just briefly review with you the dates that are of significance on the state level so that you have a sense of the timeline in which the town's actions would need to be taken. So a cannabis advisory board has been appointed already. That's a 25-member advisory board, and they are going to make recommendations to what will be a cannabis control commission, 5-member regulatory board that is due to be appointed by the 1st of September of this year. Now that Cannabis Control Commission is charged with putting in place regulations by March 15th of 2018. And those regulations are going to cover the licensing procedures as well as some of the way that the state is going to regulate these types of uses in terms of packaging and labeling and tracking sort of seed to sale plants and security, and there's a wide variety of regulatory authority that Cannabis Control Commission has been given, and we will see those regulations come into effect on March 15th.
Katie, can I just add?
Yes.
So the Cannabis Advisory Board
Yes.
is supposed to be appointed by September 1st.
The Cannabis Advisory Board is a 25-member advisory board that's going to advise the Cannabis Control Commission.
Right.
So that 25-member board has already been appointed.
Okay.
And by September 1st, we'll get the 5-member, and those are the people who are going to actually be making the decisions. Everybody else is advisory.
Yeah, so the Cannabis Control Commission is supposed to be appointed by September 1st?
By September 1st of this year.
Okay.
And when the governor was here, we asked him a lot about this, and he was very committed to meeting all the timelines and all the deadlines. He did ask us what our county went. He was very interested in the vote in a particular county, and since it was pretty overwhelmingly I believe it's one of the highest votes. I don't know if that's true in the Commonwealth.
In favor of.
In favor?
Yeah.
It was?
I don't know where it falls on the spectrum, but it was certainly higher than most of the other sort of Cape areas.
Okay.
The overwhelmingly Cape communities, with the exception, I believe, of Nantucket and Provincetown. The majority of Cape communities voted no on question 4. So by June 1st, or sorry, back up 1 second. April 1st, that's our next date of significance. That is when the Cannabis Control Commission can first accept license applications for recreational marijuana establishments. They're going to give some level of priority review to medical marijuana establishments already in operation or already licensed and registered. But they will process all of those applications in due course, with the first licenses being issued by the 1st of June. That's the earliest a license may be issued. Otherwise, 90 days is the period of time that they've been given in which to issue licenses. So that's the deadlines. Those are the deadlines we're talking about. It's a fairly short time frame from here. Now, this new law raises, as we've discussed, a lot of questions for municipalities on a policy level with respect to how they want to go about regulating marijuana.
Katie, sorry. I want, this is so confusing, and I just want all of us to be really clear on it. That other date we talked about before the meeting, May 1st, 2018, those were the special regulations for Dukes and Nantucket counties?
That's correct. So as I mentioned last time I was here, the legislation provides that there shall be special regulation and accommodation made for the counties of Nantucket and Dukes. We don't know the subject of those accommodations, but we suspect that they will have to do with water transport, and that's May 1st. So those are not scheduled to be issued until after the first round of licenses will have already been applied for. So those are your dates.
Can we go back to that Cannabis Advisory Board again? They're making recommendations to the commission about what?
About regulations, oversight. It crosses a broad cross-section of interests. Everybody from industry professionals to public health officials. There's one appointee from the Mass Municipal Association. The idea is to get a variety of viewpoints informing the Cannabis Control Commission as they move forward to adopt their regulations.
Okay.
To make sure that all viewpoints are considered and the implications of these regulations on different groups and entities will have been evaluated.
Got it. So the commission then makes its recommendation, its regulations, they will issue regulations by March 15th about packaging, labeling, oversight, security, all that stuff.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we're in a position right now, as we discussed before, of not having the benefit of these regulations. But it's expected that the state will assume quite a high level of control and regulation with respect to how these operations are licensed and how they operate. There are some regulations reserved for municipalities, and that's where we get to. So the law that has enacted or is implementing recreational marijuana is known as 94G. And Section 3 of 94G deals specifically with local controls. And it gives municipalities a couple of different ways in which to regulate recreational marijuana.
You want to move the mic?
Sorry, is that better? So, municipal regulation of marijuana needs to take place in the form of bylaws, enacted by the legislative body. Some of those may possibly take the form of zoning, and that is probably the most likely regulatory path that municipalities will take if they are simply regulating the time, place, manner in which these establishments are permitted to operate. There is a second set of regulations that may be imposed by municipalities, and it's a special process outlined under 94G Section 3 local controls. And those are going to be triggered in the event a municipality wants to do a prohibition, a partial prohibition, or a number limitation on the types of establishments. So just to make it clear, if you're going to regulate all types of marijuana establishments, and that's going to include all the umbrella term of cultivators, retail, product manufacturers, independent testing laboratories, any other licensed recreational marijuana establishment. If you're simply going to regulate those as allowed uses subject to special permit or by right, however you're going to do that, that's going to be a straight zoning bylaw. If, in the course of determining how to regulate, you want to impose either a partial prohibition, a complete prohibition, or some sort of limitation, that's when you trigger this second set of requirements. And because Nantucket was a community that voted yes on ballot question 4, it's a two-part process for the prohibition, partial prohibition, or limitations. That
And the
two-part
limitations
process-
include number, you said.
Number of stores.
Yes. So let me just back up and say what those types of votes could be. Your prohibition can be a total prohibition on all types of recreational marijuana establishments, or you can choose to prohibit just certain types. So you may want to allow retail sales, but not cultivation and independent testing laboratories and product manufacturers. If you're going to prohibit some subset of marijuana establishments, that's a partial prohibition. And you are allowed to do that. You can determine complete or partial. The second type of limitation is linking the number of retail sales to your liquor license for off-premises consumption. And the number has to be limited to 20% of liquor licenses for off. So.
Is that for annual and seasonal, or just annual?
It doesn't specify, so that's a question that we'll need some perhaps further clarification on. So then the
So
third.
is it retail sales, or is it like liquor stores, or is it, it's not restaurants?
It's not restaurants, it's your off-site consumption.
So we have don't we have 9 liquor stores?
Year-round, and then probably another 10 or 12 seasonal, right?
Oh, hold
What's the
on.
number?
I got it somewhere here.
I think 9 is the annual number.
Keep going and I'll get it.
So that's your second type of limitation. The third type of limitation you can impose under the special procedures is linking the number of marijuana establishments to the same type of medical marijuana uses already allowed in the town. So, but it has to be fewer than the number of medical. That's the language specific to the act. So under that type of limitation, once you have 2 medical dispensaries, you can then have 1 recreational.
What if you only have 1?
If you only have 1, the number is fewer. So a strict interpretation would say you would have to get to 2 before you could have fewer than the number.
So if you only had 1 medical, then you couldn't have a retail.
Then you couldn't have
until
a
another
recreational.
medical came in.
Or you could have 2 medical and then you'd have 1 retail.
Yeah,
Like
but
you-
until 2 were approved and in business,
Oh, I see.
no one could come in.
No one could come in,
So
correct.
what's our current policy on or framework for medical marijuana establishments?
My understanding is that you have zoned for medical marijuana. There is one license that has received provisional certificate of registration from Department of Public Health, although it's my understanding there is some question as to the location. So that is the only approved facility.
But how many, I mean, I thought we had a limitation on the number we needed to approve of medical marijuana.
I don't know that the bylaw does not impose a limitation currently.
Okay. So there's no limitation. So if someone applies for it, meets all the regulations, we have to approve it for medical marijuana?
That gets us into sort of another complicated how the current Department of Public Health regulatory scheme is currently set up. As of right now, there's discretion on the part of the Board of Selectmen with respect to whether or not you grant a letter of support or non-opposition to any future applicant. Denial of such a letter terminates their ability to go forward with an application at the Department of Public Health level. So there's a gatekeeping function currently in place with respect to any future applicants. They would have to come to this board for approval before they could get licensed by the Department of Public Health. I say that with the caveat that this is all going under the Cannabis Control Commission for new regulations in the next six months. We don't know if that gatekeeping function will be preserved going forward.
So they can take that away, and then we're back to...
I mean, we can, this board voted to have a special town meeting for the very subject that you are bringing up. And I still haven't, and so when will we see specific articles, proposed articles, for the annual town meeting?
So let me just...
Special town meeting.
So there are some policy questions that the board has to determine before we can provide you with the specific articles that will meet your goals with respect to going forward with regulation. Now, just to complete my train of thought here on the limitation and prohibition requirements of the new act, if you are going to pose any of those limitations or prohibition requirements, that is when you trigger the need for a special election and a ballot vote, which has to be a majority in the affirmative of a bylaw that will impose those limitations or prohibitions. So that's a two-part process to prohibit and limit. And again, just to go back, if you're simply regulating, if you're simply allowing all types of marijuana establishments within a particular zone that you designate under zoning, that's your straightforward zoning bylaw adoption procedure. So those are the two ways in which you can either regulate completely or propose some level of limitation or prohibition. So the board is going to have to first make a determination as to which path it would like to go. Now, I'd like to come back to the idea of a zoning moratorium because it's particularly relevant with respect to the dates that I outlined at the beginning. We have been strongly advising, and I spoke to the board the last time I was here, about the powerful tool that is available in the form of a zoning moratorium. The zoning moratorium is a temporary prohibition on any use designated under that moratorium. Many municipalities are voting these. They're in the form of a zoning bylaw. They require a 2/3 vote, but once they're in place, they're there for a temporary period, and the purpose of them is to allow municipalities additional time in which to consider the planning and policy objectives that they want to accomplish, especially in a situation like this where there's a complete new legislative scheme that raises a lot of questions. In this particular case, we still have no regulations on the state level to help guide the municipality in terms of how they're going to potentially regulate these uses, how the licensing is going to work, whether or not something additional may be delegated to the municipalities in terms of the licensing and review process. There are simply a lot of unanswered questions. So a zoning moratorium is an effective way to buy yourself some more time to consider what your goals are as a community and how you want to go about accomplishing them. Now, there was some...
So is that something we can talk about now and make a decision?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about it.
We're going to do that, but I'm just waiting for Katie to finish with
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to say the last time I was here, there was some discussion about what happens if a zoning moratorium fails to pass. I've gone back and looked at all of the communities that have done zoning moratorium up to this place. There is not a community in Massachusetts that has put one on a warrant that has failed to pass to date. But certainly, if you have some concern about whether or not there is going to be the necessary 2/3 vote to pass the moratorium and get that into place, you may want to consider putting your regulatory zoning as a backup article to your zoning moratorium article, which would only be considered in the event the zoning moratorium fails to pass. And that backup article would allow you to at least designate some degree of time, place, and manner restriction with respect to marijuana establishments, which, if voted, means that by April 1st, when those first applications come in, you have at least established a district in which you would be comfortable allowing those uses, and you could have at least perhaps designated whether you're going to subject those applicants to further review in the form of special permit or at least site plan review. So those are the options. Just to review quickly, I think the board needs to consider whether it wants to proceed with an article for a zoning moratorium, perhaps an article for a backup regulatory zoning, and you may also want to consider whether you want to, at this time, consider prohibition, limitation, and the procedures that would be attendant to those types of limitations if you go forward in that regard, which would require a special town election in addition to your bylaw.
So you, on it sounds like one of your arguments about doing the moratorium is because you said towns that have done that they've all passed, right? So what was the vote of those municipalities or towns at the recent election? Were these communities that were very much against it, and so they put a moratorium in, or were they like Nantucket, who's very much in for it? I think that I'd like to know that.
Yeah. I can't tell you the precise vote, but I do know it's a cross-section of yes and no communities.
Okay.
There were 91 communities that voted no on 4. So there was it's a minority number of communities for no on 4 in the first instance. But many of these communities are considering the same questions that Nantucket's considering with respect to, do we want to have some sort of limitation on the number? Where do we want to put these in terms of zoning? Do we want to have some sort of requirements in built into our bylaw that allow us some discretionary review and conditioning authority? Those are questions that on a planning level may take some time, public hearings, all of those things that are attendant to enacting zoning. And this simply buys you additional time to go through that process without feeling the rush and the pressure of having something on the books before April 1st.
So initially, I was concerned with the idea of a moratorium because 61% of the voters of Nantucket voted to allow recreational marijuana. But the way these dates are lining up with all of these unknowns, I'm feeling like we have to propose a moratorium because we won't even know the special provisions that are relevant to Nantucket until May 1st, let alone the other regulations that won't be in place until March 15th, all of these that they're not dates that line up with our April town meeting to enact anything. I am in favor of also doing a zoning article because I think that we've got some clear ideas of what we want that to look like, but that it will probably evolve further. We don't know if we're going to have licensing authority over these like we do with liquor licenses or any of that yet. We won't know it till March 15th. I don't want it to be construed in any way that I'm proposing a ban when the community voted for this. This would be a very temporary piece so that we can get all of the parameters in line and enact correct policy and zoning regulations. So that's my feeling. What does the rest of the board think would be?
I don't want to interrupt, but just a couple of things. It seems like if we maybe go through a couple of things here, we might be able to put some of them to bed, and maybe you determine yes or no on a moratorium and what the date would be. Yes or no on the zoning bylaw. I think we're going to do that anyway. And Andrew is already working on one, and you have had some discussion about mirroring the medical marijuana, just where those are allowed. And I'm not sure what other zoning issues you'd put into a zoning bylaw, but as to Jim's question, when will we see that? We discussed that today, and hopefully very shortly we'll see that. And then the general bylaw items, I don't think the board is of the three things that you can limit, the types, it doesn't seem like we would go for a full ban. I'm not sure I've heard anybody talk about a partial ban, although that might be something for you to discuss. And the number of, how you limit the number of establishments, that might be for some discussion as well, but we'll need to keep in mind that will also require a ballot vote.
So is the moratorium question on the table now?
Oh, but I'm sorry, one last quick thing about the number. We have 17 liquor package store licenses, 9 seasonal, and the rest annual.
Okay.
Just a question on the moratorium, sorry, and the timeline. So other towns, is the moratorium in place until December 2018? Was that the date, or do we set the moratorium date?
So the moratorium has to be approved by the Attorney General. The Attorney General has, of the approvals that the Attorney General has done to date, December 31st of 2018 is the furthest date that has received approval. There have been a couple of communities that tried to push it farther, and they have been disapproved by the Attorney General. There are some communities that have done shorter moratoriums, terminating, for example, 6 months after the regulations have been issued, choosing a date somehow linked to the issuance of regulations. Some have chosen September. So, I mean, there's flexibility within that range, but December 31st is your outer limit.
And if, go ahead.
That means we're right back in the same situation we are now next year. If it's December, we're right back to another special town, unless we do it this spring, we're right back to another special town meeting. Because the moratorium's gonna die, it's gonna go away, and we're gonna be right back here again with with all the problems we have with special town meetings. So I kind of think we should try to put as much of this to bed now as we can.
Well, if we enact.
Especially, I'm also uncomfortable about putting a moratorium forward, but then saying, well, we don't really think it's going to pass, so we're going to have this backup. I think I would rather just do it all now, personally.
Well, I don't think we can identify everything now when we don't know all the regulations. I'd like to enact the zoning, and hopefully it will be appropriate, and when the moratorium were to expire, it would go into effect. So then it would be in place. If it works, we wouldn't have to have a special. But if there's something that needs to be added to it or tweaked in it, we would have to have a special, because we won't make April 1st, or the April.
So at the end of the so if we had a moratorium in place, then we would take the next, we'll say, 12 months to determine what the policy would be. But then we would need a vote at the end of that. We couldn't, so that would necessitate.
We would still need to have another town meeting.
Right.
But it's because of the way the state's laid out these dates, they don't coincide with our annual.
So Don, are you saying, so for the April annual town meeting, let's put our best guess forward in a moratorium, and let's hope that our best guess of what we put in the annual town meeting, if that works, fine. Moratorium runs out, and then we're all set. Is that kind of what
Well,
you mean?
I was saying if we enacted the moratorium and the zoning at the special, then as soon as the moratorium expires, the zoning we've enacted would go into effect. And we might, maybe by March 15th, maybe we could do a placeholder article where we could tweak something in the zoning. That would be a possibility. I really think that we need to do both to be safe on this. And it's not me wanting to ban it. It's just, I think we need to cover all of our bases, because there are so many things we don't know.
I agree.
There are so many things we don't know about how they're control the quality and the testing and none of that's completely clear yet.
But is that within our jurisdiction? How they're going to control the quality? Those are things that other commissions are going to be, that we don't have to make a decision about.
It might play into us doing a partial ban on some of the things. There may be some pieces of it, not necessarily the retail, but other ancillary pieces of the business that we don't necessarily want done on island. I don't know the answer to that. I'm not really making assumptions either way, just making an assumption that I don't know all the things that may come up.
Some of the things that have happened in Colorado and places is the energy use, from the water use from some of these facilities is phenomenal. The energy use, because the grow lights and everything in some of these I've read is pretty substantial. So that's one of our concerns. One of the other things that was interesting I read about was there are more fires in homes because people are cooking stuff and making brownies and doing different things they're not supposed to do. So all of a sudden you've got the fire departments are busier in some of these areas, which I would never have thought of. So there are some things that you wouldn't have thought of. I think maybe we should go around. I would like to have a prohibition. I would like to have it be linked to, I'd like to have 2 medical and less than the medical, and I'd like to some sort of partial ban, prohibition on some of these, maybe cultivation and things. I think it's easier to let the reins out than it is to pull the reins back in. So I think as a community, we should start, conservatively, and then if it's not an issue and we want to go forward, we should let the reins out. But I would be uncomfortable just having only a zoning situation and allowing everything, and then finding out that there's 2 or 3 things that are really bad, that, oh my God, these guys are running electricity day and night. Who knows what it'll be.
Can you address that within, say, it wasn't within the year at the next town meeting, though? You could try and amend some of the things that weren't working.
Yeah, but once you've given it, in the state of Mass, once you've given something, it's hard to take it away. So say 5 people jump in and they all apply, and this commission says, gee whiz, if they've applied before this date, you can't deny them. We could end up with 5 people with a full-blown, facilities. And is that, I'm just picking, a what if, but if we ended up with 5 people that the commission approved and they're full-blown facilities and they can, cite them here, we're stuck with them. We could say no to them after, but then it's sort of, I think we'd have a hard time. So I'm more comfortable allowing it in a very limited way, and then letting the reins go as we go.
So I'm just trying to think of an efficient way to get decisions about this.
Why don't
So
we
it'd be
start with
helpful
the
if we had like a grid, almost like a checklist. We all could, that would be, because right now it's a little bit of a mush with all the dates and everything.
Well, why don't we start with, as a board, whether we want to put forth a moratorium article for the special? Well, can we just sort of poll, see if anybody has anything to say on it?
Don, do you have an idea of a time frame for the moratorium?
I think that because of when our annual is, it would have to be late enough to get through a special in the fall and have it approved by the Attorney General. So what would that be?
I would
like?
recommend December 31st of 2018.
Maybe December 15th, prior to the holidays. I don't know.
You don't have to take any action to lift it. Once it's on and the date expires, then it's effectively null in your zoning bylaw.
But then we would have to have a meeting, or we wouldn't?
No, the moratorium would just lift. It's just if we wanted to do anything prior to it, to enact zoning or other parameters, it would have to happen prior to it expiring and with enough time between a vote and for the Attorney General to approve it.
Yeah.
So wouldn't we still have to have a special town meeting if it's done? We have to have everything in place by December 31st, right? Because we want to wait to see. We have no idea what this 5-member
Yes.
board is going to regulate or
We
not.
are most likely, unfortunately, signing up for another special town meeting, but it's the nature of how this thing is structured. And
Unless
we have
they-
to deal with it.
Unless they give you know, the local, give a fair amount of local control.
Yeah.
If they actually do that, then maybe we won't have to. But I don't, you know, what's the likelihood of that?
I mean, the subject of Cannabis Control Commission regulations, the subject matter of those are fairly comprehensive, and I suspect you're going to see a high level of state regulation and a fairly low level of local authority. I think you're going to be limited primarily to sort of your time, place, and manner restrictions, which are going to be primarily through zoning. There will probably be some authority to regulate through Board of Health, things related to nuisance, noise, you know, those types of things, which you have the authority to do anyway. There may be some things that are delegated to municipalities in terms of enforcement or that are not currently called out. But I mean, the danger in over-regulating is that then you become preempted by the state. Putting in place a fairly basic, you know, use, here's the zone in which it's allowed, here's the special permit, here are the criteria we're going to consider in issuing a special permit. I mean, something like that could probably be easily tweaked if you determine that there are some additional discretionary factors in the regulations that you have the authority to consider in determining whether or not it's appropriate to grant a permit.
And why couldn't we do all that for the special town meeting?
The only thing that you don't have right now in that regard is the state regulations, which perhaps will give some additional guidance on those types of things that I just described in terms of what a locality
Understood, but the concept of, well, we have to put it in now, it's easier to release it than it is to keep it. We could put what we think is the right thing, and then as it gets trumped by the state, we would, you know, make changes to that.
Yeah.
I don't see why, but those things didn't seem to be insurmountable to be put down in a warrant for this town meeting.
The only caution I would give is that if you don't do the moratorium and you just go forward with the regulatory zoning, and then that's what's in effect as of April 1st when those first round of licenses are applied for. If in that intervening time between when the regulations are issued and you determine there's maybe some additional changes you want to make, and you make those changes, anybody who comes in as of April 1st will be governed under whatever was in place on that date.
Understood, yeah.
And they will be grandfathered under that zoning. If your moratorium is still in effect in that period, you don't deal with the grandfathering issue. That's really the distinction to be made with respect to having a moratorium and not, is that you have additional grandfathering protection during that time period in which you adopt your initial regulatory scheme and you determine based on the regulations whether you want to make any amendments or changes to it.
Okay, so on the moratorium?
I'm leaning towards, I still like the two-pronged approach with the moratorium and a backup zoning article in case. I think the moratorium, there's two things. One, I feel uncomfortable making decisions that might get grandfathered in without knowing the final language. I think some of it still sounds like it could change, and it sounds like it doesn't quite suit us. There may be more special regulations, like linking to the medical marijuana, the quantity. I also think, and this goes back to what you had pointed out, I think one of the first times this came up was the idea of public hearings and really understanding, getting a good handle on what the island wants, and I don't feel that between now and November we can really do that. I've been surprised by my personal polling, people who are marijuana users who have been more conservative about limiting or the types of establishments that would be on the island. So I think there's a lot of discussion still to be had, and I think a moratorium would give us that opportunity. So I would lean towards a moratorium, but also towards having a bylaw to back it up in case it doesn't pass.
Yeah, I don't have a strong position either way. I would like the discipline of getting as many things on the special town meeting that we know we're going to do as possible.
I agree with that, Jim, and I also agree with Rita. I have a problem explaining this to the public and friends. Mm-hmm. It's so complicated. Mm-hmm. So the moratorium would give us time to figure it out and for public outreach, which is needed on this. I mean, we barely can figure it out from what you're saying. So it's going to be very difficult for the public to make a decision on anything. But none of us wants to say yes on moratorium because we voted yes on it. So the perception is going to be that we're going against what the community voted on, but we're not.
It needs to be very clear that the idea is a temporary moratorium. It will expire, but it's because we do not know all of the regulations yet. And I'm comfortable with the temporary moratorium till, say, December, and I would like to enact the zoning that coincides with what we've already done for the medical. As far as prohibition, temporary prohibition, or limiting the number of establishments, that I don't really want to put something forth on until we have the community discussion. And that may be something we could put on in April.
Certainly, yeah.
And if we have the moratorium, that gives us that time. So that's my take.
Well, it certainly give the people at town meeting the opportunity to weigh in on. If we propose some limitations for this special town meeting, that would be a way to test the waters too.
Well, if we propose limitations, we're going to have to schedule.
You were saying no limitations for right now.
I don't want to propose the limitations without having a more community-based discussion on what those limitations should be.
We could in April maybe if we wanted to.
Yeah.
If we institute the moratorium and the backup zoning, we could have that discussion to formulate articles for April.
And I think 70 years of prohibition, taking the time to get it right, I'm with you, Jason. I think that we would get flack, and I think that for any kind of moratorium, but I do think it's reasonable to say that I think any prohibitions or limitations at the special town meeting will make the article more contentious and less likely to pass, and we'd be stuck with nothing then. So, but if we can bring it back in April for further discussion, I think that would be ideal.
Does somebody want to make a motion on this? On any piece of it?
So on the moratorium?
On the moratorium, on the zoning article?
I think I thought we were just take it one at a time.
Yes, let's do
So
the
on the
moratorium.
moratorium, I would make the motion, we put an article in the warrant for a temporary moratorium until December 31st, 2018.
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor of that motion?
Before we look at discussion, if we pushed it later, if we pushed it out into May, was the worst going to happen is the Attorney General's just going to push it back, right?
I would advise against pushing a moratorium into May. It will be disproved, and we would have to very carefully craft that language such that the Attorney General could somehow preserve, back to a certain date. I think her position on that's pretty clear as of right now. Even after the legislation has been adopted, the new legislation, she's still keeping that date.
I'm trying to avoid another special town meeting.
No, I understand.
Yeah, we're under the gun.
All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries unanimously, so that will be added to the warrant. Does someone want to make a proposal in regard to the zoning article?
I make a motion for an article, zoning bylaw regarding marijuana or recreational marijuana.
But I think we need to see it.
Yeah.
And it's already on the list to be developed, so I don't know. Do you need?
Okay, well,
I don't know if you need a note.
I thought that we should probably tie them together.
Yeah.
That we want to do both.
Yeah.
And then it would go into effect at the expiration of the moratorium, and that it would be similar to
Why
as
wouldn't
we
it go into effect with the town
discussed.
meeting, the special town meeting?
Well, it wouldn't, the parameters wouldn't actually be valid until after the moratorium expired.
Because nothing can happen until then.
Well, I think we have to be careful, because if we link it to the moratorium and the moratorium fails, then we have nothing.
No.
This would be a separate article.
No, I understand, yeah. So if the moratorium fails, this would go into effect.
I think just linking it in our vote as opposed to the actual.
I just meant that for us, we want to do both.
Yes.
Was the
Separate
direction. We wanted two separate articles. The moratorium would probably go on the warrant first, and the zoning article would go on the warrant second. I think we should take a vote on it.
Yeah.
to have.
And I
planning to
sort of
finalize
said
that.
yes to the moratorium based on the fact that we will also have a backup zoning bylaw. So I would make a motion to have an article on zoning for recreational marijuana.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Now we've got the question of, do we want to do anything further?
Yeah.
There's number or prohibition or anything.
Yeah, I don't think so at this time. I think that's something we should discuss for April with broader community input, but.
So will medical marijuana, when will that go into effect? I mean, when will we've got people applying for
Yeah.
licenses. Is this whole thing just on retail, or is it medical and retail?
Retail only.
This is retail.
So the recreational marijuana is one component of this, and that's that whole umbrella of all
So the
recreational
whole discussion
uses.
tonight is just on retail marijuana?
That recreational marijuana
sorry,
and all of its
recreational
subsets.
marijuana.
Yes.
Now, medical marijuana, we've got somebody who's applying for a medical marijuana license, and what's our procedure for weighing in on that?
That's a good question. I'm glad to address that. So right now, the licensing regulatory authority for medical use marijuana is the Department of Public Health. The Department of Public Health has put in place a series of regulations which govern how those people get registered and licensed. Under this new act, the Cannabis Control Commission is going to assume that authority. So there's going to be a transfer of regulatory authority from the Department of Public Health to the Cannabis Control Commission. The Department of Public Health regulations are going to be rewritten by the Cannabis Control Commission. And once that transfer of regulatory authority is complete, then the regulatory scheme that's currently in effect will cease to govern. Any applicant that is in process or right now will continue their application procedures under the Department of Health regulatory scheme as it exists. The complete transfer of authority to the Cannabis Control Commission on medical marijuana is scheduled to happen no later than December 31st of 2018. As of that, so in this interim period, Department of Public Health is still regulating, and those regulations are still in effect. If the Cannabis Control Commission comes out with something regulatory before December 18th, before December of 2018, that will control. But in any event, by December 31st of 2018, we're going to have a completely new regulatory scheme that's going to govern. Anybody that received a provisional certificate of registration or a final certificate of registration from the Department of Public Health is grandfathered under the terms of that regulatory scheme that was in effect at the time. So here in Nantucket, you have one license that has a provisional certificate of registration and one that's in process. If the board goes forward with the second applicant, then they will continue under that public health licensing scheme. Depending on when that transfer of authority ultimately happens, it could impact the manner in which they apply for their license.
So what role do we, if any, play in that?
Well, currently, the requirement for the Department of Public Health licensing is that they obtain a letter of support or non-opposition from the Board of Selectmen.
So we've issued a letter of non-opposition, was what we
Of
did.
non-opposition.
What we did last time.
Okay.
Andrew wanted to say something.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I have a question on this. The letter that the board issued prior was to a certain operator at a certain address. Now, it's come to at least my attention that they have not moved forward on the address that the board issued their letter of non-opposition for. So is there a process for the board to reconsider that letter? And, you know, how if they're not going to move forward on that and they're holding a license, it seems to me there needs to be some sort of clearing up of that situation, at least at the local level, before the board hears a new application.
Sure. So with respect to a change of location, under the current Department of Public Health regulations, there's a siting profile that's filed as part of their initial provisional certificate of registration. That siting profile has to include a letter of support or non-opposition from the Board of Selectmen. Once that provisional certificate is issued, you cannot revoke that letter. That's a done deal with respect to that location. However, if they are changing their location between their provisional certificate and their final certificate, they have to file an application for a change of location. An application for a change of location requires that they obtain a new letter of support or non-opposition from the board. So if they have selected a new location before they can get their final certificate, they're going to have to come back before you and disclose that new location and get a new letter. There's a question as to what the board's discretionary authority is with respect to withholding that letter at a change of location stage in the application versus an initial application stage. The board has very broad discretion when you're first considering an applicant to deny that letter. Once you get to the change of location phase of the application, the board really can only withhold that letter if you have some sort of justified concern with the new location provided. It would be our opinion that based on the consideration given by the board of this applicant and their reliance on that in going forward with their investment and the substantial outlay, it would be difficult for the board to make an arbitrary determination to withhold such a letter at a change of location.
Now, could we
date.
give them a time frame of you've got to have true control of another piece of property?
Certain.
Yeah, because
so if
Doesn't sound like
otherwise
it.
they just get to hold that license and
Yes.
it can interrupt someone else getting one.
If they don't move forward in a timely manner with the Department of Public Health with respect to finalizing their certificate of registration after they get their provisional certificate, their application could potentially lapse at the state level.
Do you know what
And
that?
I unfortunately don't know off the top of my
Okay.
head what that time limit is, but there
Maybe we
certainly
could find
is
out.
a finite amount of time.
And that's not, but again, that's not within our jurisdiction.
With respect to the lapse of that,
Yeah,
no, that's
right,
going to be
right.
on the DPH.
So I guess the answer to Andrew is no. Okay.
What if somebody wants, what if an operator has gotten that letter, are they allowed to sell that or transfer that to some other entity?
No, they
They're not?
can't.
Okay.
It's unique to their operation.
Okay, good.
But there are big changes coming on the medical side of things. The regulations that were in place initially really were tailored to a use that was illegal in all other contexts. So there's going to be a lessening of the regulatory authority with respect to medical marijuana because there's not the same level of concern with respect to who can possess, who can transport, who has authority to, issue the prescriptions. So I think we're going to see a lot less state and local authority to have some discretion in the regulation of those licenses going forward. And it's going to be substantially streamlined and the process will be sped up.
And why would a businessman open a medical marijuana establishment and serve 10% of the population that when they can open a retail and serve 100% of the smokers?
So that's an important point, and which I should really be addressed to the board since we're talking about your open medical license. There's a provision in the Act that says anybody who was licensed or registered by July 1st of 2017, if the town is going to do something other than a full prohibition of all recreational marijuana, if you're going to regulate it in some capacity, which is what you're talking about doing, you cannot enact a zoning bylaw that would prohibit the holder of that license from converting to a recreational marijuana establishment. So if they apply on the state level and get their license for recreational, and it's in an area that you have zoned for, you are likely looking at an applicant who already has a recreational, the potential for a recreational license.
So I guess I've reached the limit of my taking in complexity. And as much as I'd like to talk about limitations, I think we should just stick with the moratorium and the zoning bylaw for right now.
It sounds like we may need to tweak our zoning bylaw for medical, too. So,
I don't know how everybody else feels about it.
I'm with you.
Maybe me too.
I'm not all that worried about standing up at town meeting sooner rather than later and saying that this shouldn't be a free-for-all. That, you know, I just, I mean, I feel like, I mean, I don't think we should have it at all, personally. But at the same time, people have voted for it, so we're probably going to go through and do it. I have some friends who, you know, would like to keep it local and not have it here anyhow for different reasons. But I think that, you know, they'd like there to be no, you know, retail pot down here, because then you'd still be able to grow it here. Sort of along the lines of what Rita was talking about. Some of the people who are, you know, sort of growers and users.
It'll hurt their business?
That's sort of a different way to look at it. And so
they don't want competition to come in.
Exactly.
They don't want
gonna
licensed competition.
They're going to have 12 plants in their backyard,
Yeah.
and 12 plants in their friend's backyard, and, you know, they're going to be fine. So I just think, which that's not what the state
not
is.
legal.
The state doesn't want that. That's not legal, and the state doesn't want that, because the state wants the money from this. So what I'm concerned about, if we don't limit in some manner, is that the state is going to make the rules relatively loose, because the state sees 20% tax, you know, with us getting whatever we get, and them getting theirs.
That is another piece we
have to
need to
change.
talk
We do
about.
have to change the tax rate. But so I just think, don't kid yourself. This is a money issue on the state level. As much, you know, this isn't a, you know, with all the, I just think there's going to be a lot of unforeseen consequences. There's going to be a lot of health impacts with this. But I think the state is willing to forego those because they're going to make a lot of money. And so I just think this is not a, you know, this is about money more than it is about marijuana.
And that's why I'd like to see staff come up with, or legal counsel come up with some kind of a visual, or just so we can understand all the consequences, decisions that have to get made, consequences of those, unintended consequences like Matt's bringing up, some document that we can digest.
We are issuing either the end of this week or the beginning of next week a comprehensive guide to regulation of medical and recreational marijuana on the local level, which will address many of these issues and hopefully summarize the things that we've discussed tonight, and good. At least be an available reference to you. This is all very new on our end. July 28th was when this came into effect, and we've been devoting a lot of time into trying to parse out the local implications and get comprehensive guidance out to our clients. So we appreciate your patience in waiting for that guidance to be formally issued from our office in a way that addresses all of these issues.
Can you keep it all to one page?
Unfortunately, no.
It's probably 150 pages, isn't it?
Of course, have to update it after March 15th.
Yes.
Okay.
Just as a final, one thing that we did not discuss, but given your vote, I feel I should at least raise the issue, is the taxation component. So there's a provision in the Act which allows municipalities to impose up to 3% local tax on the gross sale of marijuana from recreational establishments. It's a local acceptance statute. And so if you're going to go forward with a regulatory zoning, and there is some chance that your moratorium is not going to pass and you want to have your tax rate already in place, you may want to consider including a local acceptance tax article on your special town meeting warrant as well.
We got it approved at 2, so we'd probably want to change it to the 3.
Amend it.
And were you just joking when you said the state's charging 20?
The total is going to be 20. But, yeah. The total is going to be 20%.
We're getting the raw end of that deal.
Well, we get there's a
We get 3?
sales
It's
tax.
the 6% sales tax plus a 10% marijuana tax plus the 3% local option tax.
So 19.5.
So plus all of the decimals, it adds up to 20.
Yeah, the sales tax is 6 point something,
Yeah.
and So it ends up being about 20%. So the state's taking 10 plus the 6 point something.
Yeah.
So this is about income.
Yeah. No, I know, but we're not, we just get 3%, but we have all the consequences of having these establishments are being, are on our community.
Which is why I'm comfortable taking a hard line and now and loosening up in the future. Because I think the consequences that we could face could be substantial. We have such a party culture here already.
Yeah.
And, and we're trying to dampen that down a little bit because that isn't sort of, that isn't what Nantucket has been. And I sent an article about another island in Croatia out to the board that is just under siege. And, and you talk to some of the policemen now, and they've got these Facebook parties that pop up on the beach. Now, there are many 4th of Julys, any sunny day all around the island. And so do we want to continue to head that direction, or do we want to keep it under control? And I favor keeping it somewhat under control and keeping it family friendly, having some of this, but not having the island become, MTV every night, or every day. So I wouldn't have a problem putting some tighter reins on it, sooner the better.
So moratorium, zoning bylaw, and local option tax at this point.
I think for this town meeting, and I think that we need to start a discussion on whether there's going to be any prohibitions and what they're going to look like. Because also allowing these, maybe a few of them, and they're all regulated and under certain parameters, may help offset things that are done off the radar. I don't know. I mean, I've smelled a lot more marijuana just walking around this summer.
Oh, really?
So people think it's,
The
there's
visitors
definitely
are-
a culture that it's legalized
They
here
think it's
now.
legal already. The kids think that you walk behind them and they're walking down to the bar and they're already smoking, think it's legal already. That's the.
So, going into an establishment and showing your ID and, having it regulated what the dosage is kind of, just might be a better thing. I don't know. It's a broader discussion than I think we're prepared to have tonight.
Well, do you want
But we-
want candy? Do you want candy sitting in, being bought and sitting on people's, and going into
Well,
people's homes?
that's why I
and
think that we
those are the-
need to wait for what the state's regulating and put something on for the annual. Because I think we need to talk about that stuff.
No, I think we do.
And hopefully the moratorium will pass, so it gives the community the time to really weigh some of these other pieces.
But you're saying if the moratorium doesn't pass, you're nervous about
Oh, yeah, I'm nervous.
Not-
I'm nervous about all this. I'm nervous about the floodgates being open and us having even a more difficult time with the police and everybody else in the summer.
So do you think we should rethink the decision to
Well,
put some limitations on at the special town
If we have
meeting?
time to rethink it, I think we should. I personally would favor it. I told you, half hour ago what I would favor. I'd like to have one or two medical and one, and then less than that for retail. And I would like to consider, putting a limitation on some of these other products. And
So-
having it just be smoking to start with, and not have someone producing it here, not have, a lab here, et cetera. I just think we should start slow, and if it ends up not to be a problem, then loosen the reins. So that's,
Yeah, please.
So we could bring that up at another meeting. We don't
Yeah.
have to make that decision
you
tonight.
guys can sleep on it, but that's.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Do we have time to?
Yeah.
Well, we have to set the warrant on the 23rd,
Right.
Okay.
so we have one more meeting. So,
Well, set the warrant meeting. Do we have to have all the articles written?
well, this would be
Yeah,
another
it's-
article.
Yeah, you need to adopt the warrant on the 23rd.
This would be a
not the-
third article.
That's linked to if the zoning one passes, right?
But this would be a general bylaw
Yeah.
article, and
Right.
they would require they would require a ballot vote as well.
But the way we have it right now, if the moratorium gets approved, then that supersedes the general zoning. So, but if the moratorium doesn't pass, then we'd have a general zoning plus
Plus some other limitations.
potential partial
Yeah.
prohibition.
No, not if you don't have an article for it.
Right.
But if
Right.
you
No, I know,
had
that's
an
another
article
reason
for
to
it-
have, have something forward to
Do we
discuss on the
understand it enough
23rd.
tonight to even put limitation, the subsets?
Well, that's
I
the
don't-
problem I'm having. It's not that don't favor it, I just don't know exactly what we should be saying and how the rest of the community feels about it.
I think we give people access to it based on the, the law that passed. I don't know if that includes cultivation and manufacture and all that personally. To me, it's just retail, but.
I'm more confident in the moratorium passing with education, educating voters that this isn't prohibiting it forever. It's so we can understand what's going on. I'm more confident there than my confidence in understanding all the subsets and things that you just rattled off that I just don't understand or have time to weigh in on right now. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, or understand the best way to limit and regulate. I think that those limitations, regulations are based on what we know today, but it sounds like that's going to keep changing. So that's my only concern, is that we don't know enough about the best way to regulate or limit, if that's what the town wants to do, if that's what we want to do. So.
I know we really exhausted this, but it's kind of important. So
Yeah, no, I would like to focus on instituting the temporary moratorium so that we can weigh the rest of these pieces. I mean, we may want to say no cultivation because it will use too much energy, but we can't really say that unless we know that it can be transported here over our waters, and we won't know that until May. So those are the things the questions I'm struggling with. I mean, we could do something simple, like say, well, we only want 2 medical and 1 retail. But that could bring up other community discussion on, do we want to, knowingly create a monopoly? I don't know.
Well, at some point, we just have to decide what we think is best. I mean, I think we
It's
could-
not a monopoly when people can grow
Right,
6
yeah.
plants per individual in their backyard. I mean, I don't know.
I mean,
Or in the
I
closet.
would be comfortable with 2 medical and 1 retail, personally.
I mean, that would be another article proposal.
Yeah.
So, that one might not pass and the other
Right.
2 do, or
Yeah.
just the zoning passes. We can separate them all. And we are having an election because of the fire
Right.
station anyway.
Yeah,
So.
again, it's another way to test the waters.
Do you want to make a decision on this part on the 23rd?
I think on what we just talked about, the 2 and
Yes,
the 1?
this third piece.
Yeah, I think we should. I think we should.
Why don't we
yeah.
push the third piece off and think about it a little bit?
Okay, we're kind of going to need an article, though, like,
Could we
ready.
have an article drafted that said 2 and 1, just to see what it looked like, or are you not comfortable doing that?
Can we,
Would that
Katie?
be the only limitation that we're talking about?
If that's the only limitation, we could draft something.
Okay.
What are the other choices that we can limit? Can we limit cultivation? Can we limit products? Can we limit, other aspects? I mean, we're at about 4 or 5.
Yeah, so the limitation is tied, I believe, to the same type of facility. So if you've allowed like retail dispensaries, then you can limit it to, if you've allowed retail dispensaries, you can limit it to the retail sales. If you've allowed cultivation facilities, then you can have fewer cultivation facilities then.
So there could, in effect, say we limit it to 1, there could be 1 retail, 1 cultivation. They wouldn't all be one in the same operation.
This is another ambiguity of this, because they've changed the way that medical operates. It used to be these vertically integrated facilities that had cultivation, dispensing, processing all in-house. That's now been separated out, and we don't have the regulations to give us really good guidance on how that medical.
Doesn't mean we don't
part is
act,
going to-
though, just because we don't have everything tied down.
No, and certainly if you were looking to do the limitation based on the same type of, medical dispensary to retail sales, I think we could draft an article that does that. It would have to be also the same language that would appear on your ballot.
I mean, if we just had something to look at next time, we could.
Well, why don't we draft something to that effect?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We have to talk about the rest of the warrant now.
We haven't even got to the fun stuff.
So the next item is the fire station supplemental appropriation. We're in the process of preparing that article. I think you all know what that entails. The Land Bank School Property Transfer Authorization, we have an article drafted for that. This is the Creeks property in exchange for the property of the land bank meant for the school playing fields. Possible action in connection with land acquisition for the roadway widening at Washington Street and Francis Street. We don't have an article prepared at this time, and there's been some internal discussion about whether or not we should seek an appropriation for that, or a land swap, or meet with the land bank to discuss it a little further, or...
I think we should put in a placeholder article to keep this option open without any actual dollar figures or property swaps tied to it that we could finalize.
But I understand the land bank's not interested in a land swap.
It's in continued discussion.
Oh, I heard differently from Libby, that they'd voted not to do it.
I think they had some discussion in their executive session about it.
Okay.
And so I don't know what more I can mention.
All right. I guess, I wouldn't be in favor of a large financial expenditure, but we can have a placeholder, I guess, for discussion on the 23rd.
But we might be able to come up with a dollar figure that would make sense. It's an important corner to try and fix. So but we need to, we're getting an appraisal as well to figure out some more parameters.
And we'll have that by the 23rd.
No, but we would continue to do a placeholder.
Okay.
That we would then finalize in a finance committee.
So the article would say something like, to see what sums the town would vote to appropriate, and also to authorize the Board of Selectmen to acquire by purchase, gift, or eminent domain this parcel of land, or this, and then at least it's general enough to get detailed in a finance committee motion if that's where we end up.
Or to just move not to adopt.
Right, right.
But because we have to finalize it by the 23rd and we won't have all the information.
Yep. We have 5 zoning articles from planning that have come out of the so-called Article 75 from the 2017 annual town meeting, and I think Andrew's already reviewed those with you all, and they're already drafted. They were in your packet. We have a pretty straightforward easement for National Grid in connection with the C Street pump station upgrade, the MGL acceptance for special safety zones, the Planning Commission home rule petition for a membership amendment, and a real estate article from planning with some miscellaneous takings. And Andrew and I talked today about adding a couple, so we'll get those to you as soon as possible. And I think these have all been discussed with you. Potential articles to be further discussed, the district improvement financing article, and on the third bullet under the heading new since July 19th, appropriations for capital project planning in connection with Old South Road corridor improvements. Maybe these two items sort of go together. We know now there is a citizen article that's been submitted to establish a district improvement financing. So I'm not sure what other discussion the board might want to have about that now, other than what else you might want to put forward in connection with the Old South Road improvements.
Well, we had a discussion about an alternative article that would be an override for approximately $11 million to do all of the road improvements identified in the development plan.
I wasn't aware of that, so give me some more.
Well, that's basically the dollar figure that's been put on the improvements proposed in the diff, that we don't have the final yet, but that would be another way to finance it, would be to ask the
We don't
committee
know
to
what all
approve
those
an
projects
override.
are, or what kind of estimates do we have?
That's what we're waiting on the
We're waiting
final.
from who?
From the planning department.
And the 11 million is...
We want estimates from contractors and...
Andrew, can you help me with identifying the estimate of that dollar figure?
Pardon me?
Can you just help me with the estimates of that dollar figure?
Yeah, it's the capital improvement along Old South Road that we are currently studying. We have a consultant that it's underway right now. We've done preliminary estimates. Many of these projects go back years to 2008 and 9. They start with the Rotary widening. There's a roundabout at the corner of Old South Road and Fairgrounds, again, that we've discussed many, many times. There is turning lane and median installation around Amelia Drive. There is public road takings of Amelia Drive and some other feeder roads to improve circulation. And finally, there is this district, if, again, I don't know if we have the map, but the map's been provided to you before. The far end of the district at the easterly end is Arrowhead Drive, and again, some improvements that would go on there. So,
Are you proposing this for the special town meeting?
Well, we have the diff on now for
No, I
the
understand.
special
I'm
town
talking about
meeting.
the override of $11 million.
I am just bringing it up as I've been told that, that the borrowing would be essentially the same
Well,
if we were to go for an override. It's more about, do we want to recognize that all of these road improvements need to be done and try to appropriate the entire dollar amount necessary to make that happen?
Well, I'd ask town council to, or Libby, to give an opinion about about how we go about doing this. And you've seen that letter from them that this needs to be part of the capital planning process.
What do you mean?
That this has to go through not only the finance committee, but the capital program committee?
Sure, right.
And-
They would
and-
review it prior to the special.
Well, they have a annual process for doing that. That would be the 2019 capital budget process. As they look at, it's not just, they don't look at one project, they look at all the projects and they prioritize.
Well, that's what the discussion here is, do we want to pull it out of that normal process and recognize the major traffic problems that we've been experiencing, and do we want to try to do an improvement all at once? That's essentially what the diff would do. This would just be another way to get at it.
Well, I'm concerned about doing it outside. Again, I just refer to what town council had said, so maybe we should bring that letter back and.
Don, is this, if we don't do if this is really, really, are you trying to see if where the will is?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If this is really, really important, then we can just capital plan it and let's just figure it out and pay for it versus doing the diff and allocating it this way. Is that?
That's what I'm getting at, yes, thank you.
Well, I think we also have a letter, the letter from Kinder, our financial advisor, and she's recommending against the diff in her letter. So, in fact, I suggested that we, in fact, have her come to one of our meetings, and are we going to go ahead and do that?
We discussed that today. She is available to
Okay.
come to your meeting on the 23rd. So up to you all if you want to.
I think it'd be a good idea to have her come, because she's,
I don't know if
I
we,
guess-
I don't know if we need her, if you read the letter.
Right.
Her point of view, or we can read the letter on the camera, if people want to hear it, her point of view is pretty clear.
well, we have a citizen article about putting it forward, and I think it'd be, just my view, would be helpful to have her come, but.
I've not had a chance to read that article because I just got it right before the meeting. I started skimming it, but I haven't read the whole thing. But my point is more, do we want to do the road improvements? Do we want to make it a priority to fix the issues on Old South Road and the main rotary and the other need for rotaries in that corridor all at once, because there is massive amounts of development happening right now and it's long overdue? Or not?
And, I would be
What's the will of the community?
I would be opposed to that because we have a capital planning article that we take to town meeting every year, and that has all of our projects on. I'm uncomfortable taking one group of projects out and addressing them separately.
I think that there are certain points where you have to look at a larger problem and try and fix it all at once comprehensively. then going through the individual project pieces.
I agree with that, and Andrew might feel very differently because he's been looking at this since 2008, but it feels like the special town meeting was to focus on the marijuana zoning bylaw and to keep things, or what we're going to do with it, and to keep things simple. And I feel like, although it's a long time coming, this is a pretty big, if we're going to do it once and we're going to do it right, this is a pretty big topic, and it's deterring a little bit from some of the other things that we don't have a lot of time to focus on. And it's a difference of 6 months or so between special town meeting and annual town meeting, where I do think it's important. I think it should be done well and it should be done right, but I think that it's being pushed in front of us now, sort of a week before we need to decide if it's going to be on the at the special town meeting.
Well, the diff is on it no matter what.
It is,
So we're
yeah.
having the discussion no matter what.
Well, and I think that, I don't think that's a problem. I think that in order for a diff to be approved, there needs to be extensive detail. I would like to see extensive detail, financial concept, how it's all going to work. So,
I mean, the diff isn't up for our discussion. That's on. I guess that it is up to us to decide if we're going to take $16 million or whatever it is out of the regular capital review process and do it at a special town meeting that we've just heard about I've just heard about for the first time tonight, a week before we have to adopt the warrant, where we have to adopt the warrant in next week.
Some of this is why I didn't want to have a special town meeting.
Absolutely.
And I feel like this special town meeting is turning into a special interest town meeting. And it is frustrating because we're being forced to make decisions with incomplete information.
No, we're not being forced. We can just say no.
We can say no, and
Yes.
we can make recommendations against stuff, but I just feel, I'm just very uncomfortable. I think some of this stuff should be looked at for the common good, for the totality of the island, and some of it I don't feel like it is. And I feel like we're getting pressured to do things, and do things quickly, and do things with so I don't appreciate it.
and I think this discussion about the diff will help us decide whether or not we want to do that capital override. Look, if it gets approved, that's another story, but I guess I think we are being forced into having a discussion about Old South that needs to be had, but without enough time to do it properly.
I just encourage everybody to go back and read Kinder's letter and also the letter from town council about how diffs, that our current bylaws trump any review by the diff in terms of capital planning.
I'm all for transportation projects. I think we're trying to figure out how we want to pay for it, what method we want to go about it. I think it should go through the capital
If we go through
system.
representative, right?
I'm on capital program committee, yeah.
Okay, good.
Well, one of
Do
the
you think
other,
it should go through the normal capital process, or that it should be reviewed by the capital program committee?
Is that the same thing?
No, it's not. I think Don's trying to pull it out, and I think what we're saying, several of us are saying, no, it should not be a special town meeting.
I'm just saying it's already been pulled out because the
Right.
diff's in.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that we could propose it in another way.
And I think a group of us are saying no.
the other question, Tom Nevers bike path is another one that's
Yeah.
wants to jump the line. And I'll skip to that because that's probably a little easier. It's not quite as, it's not as complicated, let's say, with as many misconceptions. It's a bike path. And so I think that, if you're going to allow someone to jump the line like happened on Hummock Pond Road, there were quite a bit of donations in order to do that. There had some way maybe we should be saying, hey, if you want a better half of it, do a betterment for half, we'll jump the line. Otherwise, you're 2032. I tried to get betterments on the boulevard and I lost because people are so mad. But everyone thinks that this stuff is free, and it isn't free. We all have to pay for it, and a lot of people are having a difficult time making ends meet as it is. They're on fixed incomes, or they've got businesses and they're struggling. It's there's a lot more competition in some sectors, and so I just think that some of these things, our low tax rate, et cetera, isn't helping people. And so I think the capital process is important. I think understanding the ramifications of the decisions we make before we make them, and how much it's gonna cost for how long is important. And so I don't know.
So I'll make a motion that we remove for under new since 719, the item appropriations for capital project planning in connection with old, is that the one we're talking about?
Yep.
Just remove that. That was for planning. What is the,
Well, I didn't mean to put that in there, I guess. I thought there had been a suggestion made by a board member about,
right, I suggested we spend a couple $100,000 to do some planning so it's ready to go through the capital program committee next year. But now there's, what you're suggesting is do an appropriation.
well, I wasn't really suggesting anything other than I was trying to put forward your
Dawn,
idea.
I'm saying, Dawn's suggesting we add.
I wasn't even saying that was definitely what I wanted. I was saying this is an alternative to the DEF.
Okay.
This is
Well, how about-
another way to accomplish the same
Well, how about-
project.
how about
And
Jim's-
it has every voter signing up that, okay, I'm agreeing that my tax bill is going to go up X to get these road improvements done because I, as a member of the island, want it done. The DIF gets at it a different way. It borrows off of future assessments that then don't go into the general fund.
Well, the
as
advantage-
I think we've got a
things
good argument that stand up and again, I'd ask Kim to come, but an argument against the diff.
But-
what I don't see is a need to expedite or subvert the capital planning process for these particular projects at a special town meeting.
Well, I'm not saying it necessarily has to go to a special, but I think we do have to have a discussion about pulling this out of the normal capital process. It could go on the annual, but
Yeah, well, then it would go through the
this
capital
project needs to be looked at in a different way.
I agree completely, and that's why I suggested a couple $100,000, because right now, there's a number of 16 million.
No,
I don't think
11.
that's, or 11, whatever, 11 million. I know when we did other capital projects like the fire station and the police station, we had some development dollars to get some decent numbers before it went to capital program and the finance committee.
So is that an article that we should do now?
That's what I think so. I do.
Is that something?
Yeah.
Is that something, John, that you would,
Do you want to hire a consultant? I mean, the planning board's been working on a development plan.
do you have the numbers
Or
already?
the planning department, excuse me.
Yeah, is that superfluous? We don't need it?
You don't need it because the Old South Road corridor work is underway right now. So, there's a little bit of a timing issue because they're underway, they haven't quite finished it, but there will be numbers attached to all their projects. They're just not completed at this nanosecond right now, so.
So then we don't need Jim's.
Well, then we don't need it, but it's, then
you have
then it's
to
all
start.
set to go to capital program next fall. I mean, next, for the annual town meeting. So,
Yeah, I think the only, sort of, how do you say it? If we don't go forward, then the option is if people are energized with Old South Road, they'll adopt a diff without potentially, maybe we'll have all the stuff, Andrew, but if they may not, they may adopt it just because they want Old South Road done, and then we're locking up tax dollars into that. The difference between what Don is suggesting, that's outside of the levy limit. So that's an override, and that's extra. That's a little bit extra to everybody, but it's outside the levy limit. It doesn't constrain us, it doesn't constrain the town in future years.
And everyone knows what they're
And
signing on
exactly,
for.
and everyone knows what they're doing. If you do it with a diff, it's a little more complicated, and then you've constrained yourself, and if people are, if we hit a downturn and people are against stuff, then you're not gonna get anything done. So those are sort of so I understand why she's bringing it forward, and I don't, I'm not sure, I see both sides of
Well, I
it.
thought your argument was this is the kind of special town meeting we don't want to have.
Well, we have it.
But we
No, but,
because
no,
the
I know,
diff's
but
on.
now, do we make it worse by adding?
No, maybe we recommend it against everything and bring it all properly done in the spring.
I agree-
If
I
we
agree
want-
with that.
If as a board, we wanted to do that, then we'd have to stand up strong as a board and say,
I'm
and
willing
these
to
things
do that.
require, what, 2/3 votes A diff is 2/3, right? Or is it 50%? 50? Someone help me out.
Do we know? We should know the answer to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I used to, but it's,
Simple majority.
yeah, so 50%, so, it's, I don't know.
So how do we move forward tonight?
Well, is it something where I feel like even with the 11 million, I wouldn't know what I'm signing on for? So it's not
Well-
a nanosecond, but is that what's going to be ready shortly?
Again, it would be a placeholder where we would have the information before we would make a final recommendation.
I'm uncomfortable doing that. So how do we resolve this?
Is it something that we want to think about for the 23rd?
Yeah.
And maybe we'll have some more information that we can review in
No,
between now and then.
I don't know, how do we make I would make a motion that we not pull $11 million out for the special town meeting, although these are very important projects, and that we go through the regular capital planning process for the annual town meeting. I made that motion.
I'll
Okay.
second it for discussion.
Okay.
And I think we've made we've heard all the points all the way around, so I think it's important to see where the votes are on the board.
I think the one difference in terms of discussion would be that we might actually have the development plan prior to the 23rd to review. But
I think
I'll
that's
take,
it's a concept, that regardless of whether it's 11 or 11.5 or whatever, I think to me, it's the concept that I'm making the motion.
You want to go in through the capital planning process.
I want to abide by town council's letter, which said that the diff does not trump our local bylaws, which call for the capital planning review and finance committee review. And I think these things should not be done at the special town meeting.
but they are going to have to review the diff prior to the special town meeting.
So I'll just call the question so we can get a vote.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I am.
So how was the vote? What was the vote?
So far, it's,
I don't have a vote from Jason or Rita.
Well, I want to vote in a way. I still would like the possibility for more discussion and more information. So I don't want that to be excluded by the vote that I'm about to make. So
We'll abstain and get a tie, and we deal with it on the 23rd.
I'll abstain.
You kick the can down the road.
No, I'm with Don.
We kick the can down the road and deal with it again.
Oh, you voted yes?
Oh, yes to the
You
no.
voted no to the article, to the motion?
I think it's kicking the can, but it's 2 weeks, and I think more
So
information.
what information do we need between now and 2 weeks so we'll be able to make a decision about that?
I would like to see the development plan that if we're going to put out an article for 11 million, what that's including.
So I would like to see estimates from contractors and someone in the building trades or architects that have done some review of this, engineers perhaps. That's what I'm looking for. If that's in the development plan, that's great. But
Okay.
If you look at the development plans, they're pretty detailed. So if it's at that level, we'll be fine to review.
Well, the $11 million is coming from estimates that are
Exactly.
real. And then the development plan details the whole scale of the proposed projects.
and what I'm looking for is some meat on the bone of the 11 million estimates. And if that's in a development plan, that's great. So will that be, or?
I'm not writing it.
Okay.
So,
I think this area should be moved up a lot.
Andrew, is that, what those,
think so, but I think
what's the depth of what's the depth of the estimates going to be?
What's the big picture? Are we gonna do this? Is it just-
We have a consultant now who is their transportation engineers and everything else, so we'll ask them for the estimates.
Okay.
But we don't have final engineered plans, so that's, these are estimates only, based on the concept of what is proposed at each of the projects. So.
Okay. So, I mean, you might also want to check in with the chairman of the Capital Program Committee and the chairman of the Finance Committee to see if, what their level of questioning might be for estimates.
And I would imagine either way, the questions will relate to the DIF proposal. It's the same estimates that will go along with the DIF.
And given a choice, I favor what you're talking about, Don. Just if I had to choose, I would rather not choose right now. I'd rather, have more time.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we can discuss it again on the 23rd.
No, I understand.
just wanted to bring it up as an option.
And I think it's
because
good to
we
put it
are
on the
going to have
table.
to discuss it no matter what.
We are. I just don't want to have the diff force us into it prematurely without more information.
Okay, what's next? The new.
So back to the other new items since July 19th. We've discussed internally the reappropriation of $100,000 that was approved at the 2017 annual town meeting for the replacement of a playground at Tom Nevers, and to instead use those funds for a master plan for Tom Nevers Park, and that seems to have some support from others.
Yeah, I was a little bit concerned because the newspaper contacted me about giving an interview, and I didn't really know what had come out of that community group that had met, because it wasn't something that came through us. That there was discussion about completely eliminating the softball and the basketball and all of that out there, and I don't want it to go in that direction personally. I think that those are very well used and important, and for it to just become a completely open park is just not what it's been, and I think some people would be really upset about that.
So I'm confused. What is this item? Would you repeat again what this item is?
We approved $100,000 at the 2017 annual town meeting to replace the playground at the Tom Nevers Park.
Okay.
And since then, there's been some discussion about whether or not the Tom Nevers playground really needs to be replaced at this time. And instead, the bigger issue out there is the park itself, and making it more user-friendly, I guess, for people to go to.
And again, why is this so time-sensitive? It can't go on the annual town meeting?
Well, it's up to the board, and I think the group, the Park and Rec is sort of came out of Park and Rec discussions, had asked that it go on the special so that they could get going on the master planning process sooner rather than later.
So again, I mean, I thought we were pretty specific as to what we were going to put on this special town meeting.
It's not absolutely critical.
Okay, so we try to adopt rules and stick with them, I think, so.
Okay, so
So we're going to take it off,
thinking
leave it
that's-
on?
Well, yeah, I don't think it's something we really need to bring up right now, and I'm kind of concerned by what I've heard about
So let's just take it
the
off.
direction the master plan might be taking, and maybe it is better to just replace the playground as was already planned.
I'm okay taking it off, just because it's just to limit our special town meeting, things we have to talk about. But I was at that meeting,
Yeah,
and
so-
I didn't get that feeling at all, that it was
Okay.
remove this, remove this. It was just everybody spitballing ideas. It was the very first meeting with everybody from Tom Nevers on what they would like to see. It was more of an idea brainstorm.
So maybe there could be more brainstorming, and we could talk about this at the annual,
Yeah.
and not replace the playground right now.
And
But
they have another meeting tomorrow morning, so they're actually doing a very good job of already initiating public outreach.
Okay.
And I also have not heard any discussion about removing things, if anything, keeping what's there and making it more, even more user-friendly and adding to it. So, I don't think it needs to be on the special town meeting, but I do think they're going in the right direction.
So maybe we communicate that to them for tomorrow. They'll be able to better plan, that if they know they're not have to do a bunch of stuff to get ready for the special town meeting.
Yep, we'll communicate that to them.
Yeah.
The next item is appropriations for sewer, stormwater, and water projects in connection with the National Grid feeder project. We actually did discuss this at the July 19th meeting, and I'm awaiting some numbers from those three departments. Talked about the next one. Appropriation for supplemental funding for an airport project. They have submitted that. Apparently, they have reached a point in their project where they've realized they need additional funds and they'd like to get it finished, so they are asking it to be on the special.
So are we saying yes to that or no to that?
It's going to be done anyway, right? They need to do it now?
That's what my understanding is. They would like to finish the project.
How much is it?
I'm okay with.
How much is it?
I'm assuming this would be on the annual town meeting if it wasn't on this one.
Yep.
Is it coming from retained earnings or?
It's $403,000.
Yep.
And they would borrow it, it looks like. They're asking to borrow it. Do you know what? They run this by you, Brian?
It's, good evening. It's supplemental funding so they can actually award the contract for the work. The increase of 403 will still be, the AIP grant that they have from the federal government will still increase, so the federal government will cover 90% of it, and the state the other 5. But this will authorize us to be able to borrow for the project and move forward and get it done, so.
I think we should put this on.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Put it off or put it on?
On. Put it
Oh,
on.
I agree, yeah. That's fine.
The last item, collective bargaining agreement for Wanacommet. This is tentative. I'm awaiting some legal clarification on whether or not this is needed. So we'll have to get back to you on that one.
So we'll decide next time.
Yep. And then we've got the 9 citizen articles that have been submitted. Those are just FYI.
I guess that's that.
So we'll
for
have,
tonight.
we're going to be working on draft warrants over the next week or two, and we'll keep you in the loop of how that is transpiring.
One thought I had, just looking at the first sewer district amendment, is that were those in or outside of the district? And will they be subject to capacity utilization?
I haven't even looked at this yet,
Yeah.
so I'm not
It
really
was
sure.
just a thought, like exactly, they were outside, I don't think they were in the needs areas.
Yeah, you mean needs area.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think they were in the needs areas. And so those,
So then they'd be subject to the fee, right?
you would think, but,
Well, we'll find out.
yeah, there's the questions like that. And then again, the whole thing is, do we want to, some of these might be fine, but here we are, do we have time to really review these citizens articles? Are we going to understand the impact of them? Are we going to really review them? We're in the middle of the summer, and what are the impact? I'm troubled again.
Well,
So,
it is the downside of opening up the special,
I
but
understand.
there were reasons why we needed to do that.
And so the FinCom will still go through these, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
so FinCom will still. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah.
And so I guess what is our process for going through these?
Well, we have a staff group that will look at them and make some of the determinations that you've mentioned, and actually, it's occurring to me now, we'll need a public hearing to determine whether or not you will support them pursuant to the Sewer Act, so I got to look at that. But we'll get the staff group going.
And you'll plug that into the timeline?
Yep.
So that's 1 and 3 of sewer district. And then the rest is zoning. Bike path. What was it?
It's number 3.
Yeah, 3 is. Where,
So we'll get that going on those.
Okay.
So that's, I think, unless
That's it for the warrant.
any of you have anything else on the warrant. I'd be happy to forego my review of the town management activities report. I love to go over
No,
it
it's-
in detail, but
I think we need to hear it.
No, I think,
there anything particular that you need to point out?
Well,
Since you won't be
everything
here
I
next
need to
time.
point out, but I'll refrain. I'd maybe just quickly mention that this week we had our annual summer forum with the Nantucket Community Association and Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, and I think it went pretty well. I know a couple of you were not able to attend because there's other commitments, but those of us who were there, I think it went fairly well, and everybody did a really good job, I think, explaining their topics and answering the questions, and so thank you to that group for sponsoring it.
And it was only corrected like once today. There's something I said wrong. It was only had one correction, so that's not bad.
That's great.
Okay, so Selectmen's reports, just, they'd like us to take an action to designate the cemetery commission as special municipal employees.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Any committee reports? No. Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Oh, right.